Right, this is going to be another episode of Summoning Insight. Lots of things happening in the world, in case people haven't been keeping up to date. TSM eliminated CLG from playoff contention, that they were already eliminated from themselves. That's your update. Back in another 20 years for another headline that sounds fucking mental if you last tuned in 7 years ago. No, I don't, like, what's going on with the world right now? Like, this is how bad it's got for TSM. Not only are they not in the playoffs, their only goal left in the split is to deny CLG for making the playoffs. What? This is some like Dumb and Dumber level shit now, Monty. Like, it's just getting silly, isn't it? Like, guess what? Spoiler: neither org's good. They're both kind of shit right now, aren't they? I know.
I mean, it was. I think it was hard to be. People will say, "Oh, there were a lot of upsets. This happened. That happened this last week," which is true. But that doesn't mean that what we're watching right now is good from the LCS. And while TSM have certainly done a lot better over the last few weeks, like last couple weeks, I like the changes that they've made into putting Huni on more carry champions. We also saw more throws like we saw from Immortals last week against them. TSM, also did only go 1-2 this week, but they had a relatively tough schedule versus 100 Thieves and Team Liquid. Overall, though, I mean, they end the season basically technically in 9th place because they 2-0'd Immortals, but towards the end of the standings. Now, this is a team that I think most people expected would be somewhat middle of the pack, maybe challenging for like 5th, 6th place in terms of playoff seeding. They finally started to look like that team by the end, but it was obviously very much too late. And the question is whether they make roster changes going into summer or not, which I think is really interesting because this is kind of the best I would say eventuality that I wanted for TSM, which is to get enough false hope by the end of spring that they wouldn't make roster changes for summer, which obviously I think will be necessary to actually compete for the top. So I'm hoping they just keep everything exactly the same. Exactly.
I mean, look, let's be real. Winning 5 games is still in no context any kind of a redemption, any kind of like meaningful turnaround. I also think another find so whack, dude, is like there's no universe where they're actually fucking mid laner, surely. So to me, all you've done is you've stolen a few wins that didn't end up meaning anything, but you now either have completely abandoned that Chinese mid laner, or you're gonna have to work him in the line again. Like, that's the part I don't get, dude. It's like, to me, I would have just, once I knew that this split was fucked, I essentially would have just like used the rest of the split to figure out my roster, not try to gain the odd win and scratch and claw for everything. Like, remember, we're TSM. We're not trying to next split make 6th to making the playoffs. Our goal is worlds or boss. Like, the rest of the split should have been about that. Whereas I don't feel they're in any other position, dude. Like, as much as people are going to take a lot of heart, obviously, in like the Cloud9, the Team Liquid games, like, oh my God, like, I wouldn't be taking that and thinking it's just going to like, next split will be great. Like, how were you? If I actually look at the lineup they have now, assuming they get a competent mid laner and the rest of the pieces stay, I would guess they will be a playoff team, but not a contender. Like, I don't think there's, to me, you're going to have to do like, I don't even think you can do triage on this team, dude. I think you have to just like wholesale chop and change, which isn't impossible, but the question is, will you spend money? You're going to have to spend big money probably to do this, right?
I think you would, and like the question is, does anybody even want to join your team right now? Like, is Jensen really going to be an option? Because if they want to keep the lineup as it, I mean, they technically do have an import slot available in the mid lane.
Oh, that's true.
So they could import somebody, right? And they could try and right the ship. But I think that there is, I don't think a lot of people will want to join this roster the way it stands right now for an outside shot of competing, especially with all of the drama that's come out about this team and the kind of status of the ownership, report on Reggie still being unknown. There is a possibility that depending on what's found, that they could go through significant ownership upheaval. In the coming
if they're forced to sell or something, you mean?
I mean, they could be forced to divest the team. I mean, it's possible.
So Reggie's not involved or something. Bring someone else in, maybe.
I mean, that's not the way they've done it in the past. Right? That's not the way they've done it in the past. I'm just going to say it's not the way they've done it in the past.
One thing I've learned about Riot is they're actually opposite to the legal world. Because as far as I can tell, in the legal world, the whole reason precedents are so important is because when you establish them, you can refer back to them. The joke with Riot is it feels like every single judgment they make is almost like in isolation and has no connection to the other ones. Like, there's no bloody sliding scale for any of their punishments. Everyone knows back in the day, like the fines were the most famous one. Like, what was the fucking algorithm on how they calculated those fines? It was like no rhyme or reason whatsoever. It just went from like 2, 5, 10 to like you could just like murder a guy for 11 grand or something. What the fuck? Like, but 2 was like, you spoke to a team without asking permission. It's like, what is this fucking skill? Like, what are we doing here? By the way, though, I have to say this is why I think people have actually gone too far, though, because you're asking the right question. The key question to me is who will actually at this point join TSM? Because, like, for example, in terms of money, they could get someone tomorrow, obviously. Obviously, there's names you've just listed off, Jizuke, Jensen, Niski. These are players you get tomorrow if you can, because they just slam dunks, they're going to be competent players. But beyond that, they also have, in theory, the entire ERLs in Europe to just find a player that they want to bring, as you said, can be an import player. The bigger issue for me is this, though, is everyone's going to think naively, you just do what 100 Thieves do with Abadagi. Abadagi was the last piece they needed. This team needs everything still. So, first of all, I don't think it's going to be as simple to get someone to come over. And then secondly, here's the concern I would have, which is that I know that a lot of like the European players who are in the ERLs, it's not that they wouldn't join LCS. It's like, like it's going to be uncomfortable for them to like move to America, and they would be unsure about the culture, and they don't know. So I feel like right now in the middle of a season, that might put people off. In the same way, Monty, there's a phenomenon that happens in LEC now, where if players in the off season, not the middle of the season, the off season, get the offer, but the offer's like Astralis, the premise behind the scenes goes, actually a lot of them, if they think they could be in the best ERL team, just say no and say, fuck it, I'll do another year in the ERL, and hope that next time, instead of getting like the bottom offer, I get like, XL offers me or something, someone who's actually going to be in the playoffs, I could do something. I get the vibe people are going to start doing that with NA for some of these teams too, because like in this scenario, let's say you do from an ERL now, you're like a promising player, TSM calls you up, flies you out, you fail that one split, you have just fucked your career so hard, it would be insane. Like, think about what happened to people like Ikert when they went to NA. Like, dude, I don't think it's as much as people on paper think you get the call from TSM, they offer you the money, everyone says yes. I don't think as many people will. I think it's a lot more touch and go now, especially because the problem I see in their team, dude, and this is what I think everyone's missing, is they don't have anyone at the moment that's like a massive draw, like a teammate.
Because the only one.
Yeah, and he's so young. Like, I don't think people really look at that and think like, oh, I've got to play with him. Like, even if it wasn't Bjergsen, you have to have someone who's sort of got a quality where it's like you think you can win if you play them, or at least I'm playing with him. They don't have that, unfortunately. They just don't.
Right. And we've talked about GMing in NA and how kind of the dominoes have to fall, and there are certain players that want to play together once those dominoes fall. And like TSM always had that advantage with Bjergsen, that they had an inbuilt GMing advantage because people wanted to play with him. That obviously doesn't exist anymore. Spica is significantly better over the last few games. Seems to be back in some level of form after his MVP split, but I'm not sure that's going to be enough to really attract top level talent, especially when you don't know what the result of it's very difficult. Let me put it this way. It's very difficult to make deals when you don't know who the other party is, right? Because if you sign a TSM contract and there is something that comes down from Riot where they said that this investigation, either Reggie has to leave TSM or the team has to be sold to another entity. Well, then all of a sudden you've got a contract with somebody who you don't know who's on the other end of that. And I think it's very dumb to sign deals where the other end of the contract isn't guaranteed for the length of the contract, or at least you're reasonably sure that that's what it's going to be. So until that investigation concludes, I don't think it's wise for anybody to be signing contracts with TSM.
What I will say, the person I would suggest is the people who actually are desperate. That's what you should actually look for. Like, I'm not joking. If I was TSM, I would be considering people like Leader in Europe. Yeah. The guy needs a spot. He needs another chance on a big team. And also, by the way, I'm pretty sure his style of play would be amazing in LCS. Look at what fucking showman he is. People would love watching this guy. He's even a trash talker, for fuck's sake. He'd even fit the whole thing of TSM. Like, he's supposed to be toxic, and he's not really, but like that's the whole like baggage he carries with him. So this is why I feel like TSM don't even know their own brand, dude. It's like, that's why to me the Jensen deal was a slam dunk, mate. Because what you do even when you bring him in is like, oh, Bjergsen wants to leave. Oh, well, we'll bring in his right. You do the whole. You make it WWE. Would be amazing, wouldn't it? And if you did it cleverly, like, behind the scenes, you reach out to Steve, you can do all sorts of fun things with that. Set up like banter sessions, have silly things that are sponsor related. I mean, if you're smart, by the way, you even do what they never really did this in Tension in Europe. As far as I know, it was actually like BMW who set this up. But I always thought in Europe it was like a vaguely decent idea that those teams that had the same sponsors set up those like we're united in rivalry type things where you would make content off each other. If you do that the right way, it's just fun for everyone involved, isn't it? It's a way to make like an artificial rivalry with the real rivalry exists. So, like, to me, there's so many things you could still do with TSM. You can make them a competent team. The difference is, you look at the CLGs, the Immortals of the world. Yeah, they're in a tough spot. They're just trying to upgrade what they have. For me, though, like, because all these mistakes seem to have come from the management on down, you do have to address that problem at some point in time. Like, I get the vibe there's going to be more people jump off the ship at TSM at the end of this year, by the way. So it's not looking great in general. It's not looking great at all.
I mean, I can't imagine. Again, it's the same thing when you don't necessarily know who the owner is. It's hard to have any security as a coach when you could sign potentially another deal somewhere else.
That would also ruin TSM, I've got to say, if they made Reggie sell. Like, if Reggie isn't seriously involved with TSM, then they're just another like corporate shell that used to be a team that, you know, it's like CLG now. No, here's the real reason no one cares about CLG. It is because Hotshot isn't involved at all. It's nothing to do with them being bad at the game. If he'd have sort of like still been around and he was like coming on fucking shows, everyone would still have some interest in them as a team. You know, you'd have the theme to them at least. There's some sort of a heritage. They have nothing now. They're just a generic team, aren't they? It's just bad in LCS. Who cares? You know?
I mean, I think EG and CLG made similar bad decisions, which is when they sold to investment groups, they didn't actually hire people to basically be the mascots of the team. Like, they didn't make it a condition of the CLG sale that Hotshot had to be a public figure for them, a public face, and do content for the next 5 years, right? Like, that could have been a precondition of the sale. Now, obviously, you pay him for that as well, right? And EG, their biggest mistake was when they sold to this new entity, they didn't bring back any of the people that were legacy faces of EG, whether that was Idra or In Control, you know, before he unfortunately died, who I think would have been an amazing, absolutely incredible brand ambassador for Evil Geniuses and a face of the team. They didn't bring back any of the legacy. And what you're paying for with the EG brand is not a good logo, because the logo is shit. It's not a good name, because the name is shit. What you're paying for is the brand of being OG dominant in esports. And so you have to bring back, in my opinion, some of these people to be the face of that brand. And they didn't do that. And I think both CLG and EG were huge missed opportunities.
I've even always thought, though, like, as much as everyone in esports loves to pat themselves on the back and say how amazing they are in marketing, because people make the classic mistake of conflating some sort of material or physical or business success with, like, it must have all gone according to plan. TSM's never even understood their own identity. Like, they should from day one have been leaning into the idea, because they win all the time and they're evil. We are the evil empire. It's the most obvious casting of all time. Like, if I was them, by the way, I would have even leaned into the whole leaner angle and been like, yeah, you know what, our president does whatever they want, but you can't stop her, can you? I'd go like that fucking approach. That's how you make it seem cool, you know? That way, if you're a fan, like, essentially, I'll even give a mad example, but it's an obvious one everyone knows. This is basically one of the things that Donald Trump did as the president. He made it so that even if you didn't necessarily agree with what he said, if you were people who are on his side, like a lot of people obviously were, they were just riding with whatever the angle was. It's almost like they were just taking their orders from him, like, right, this is the angle, cool, better get in line, like, we're all just doing this joke angle, we're against this or whatever. TSM never really got that. Like, but what's weird to me is I always felt like they really just thought they were just the best. They really thought, for real, Monty, their brand was we win. Like, that can never be a brand. There's no one figured that out yet. Even T1 can't win all the time, for fuck's sake. You got to have more than that. And by the way, spoiler, what carried T1 when they didn't win? Fucking having Faker. Yeah, guess what? You needed Bjergsen. You needed double lift. That's what's so dumb about these people. Like, you can see their problem is this, dude. They can only go as far as their success takes them. They never sort of figure out something that goes beyond that. So that's why, to me, TSM also, that's why I said we're only going to talk about them in these sorts of terms and not about them as a team. Because it's actually not interesting to talk about a bad team. Like, they don't have much draw to them at this point in time. It's more just the historical context that still was weird and novel that they're the worst fucking team, isn't it? Like, it's about it.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point earlier about what's going on in LEC, I mean, we already see that in LCS. I mean, I think that a lot of players, it's been hinted at by many people, and it's true from my conversations behind the scenes, that you know, a lot of players on academy teams don't want to play on bottom LCS rosters and refuse to sign those contracts. Like, you can't tell me that Tenacity couldn't have an LCS contract right now when Fake God has one. Like, please. Right. I think it's clear that that's not where Tenacity wants to be, if I had to guess, and that's why we're seeing a lot of these kind of issues develop.
So I get it though, because I'll give you the best example ever, Monty. This might be the greatest example I've ever seen of why you can't just, even as a player, let yourself get thrown in the deep end without a fucking life preserver, as Americans call it. We call it, like I can't remember what we call it in English, the fucking circle that you hold on to. Basically, right, when if people don't know, one of the reasons why Synkrov is not considered a rookie this split is because actually in like 2017, Monty, he played like 8 games in the LEC on the bad Origin that people only remember for being the bad Origin, right? No joke. That's how many years that kept this guy's career back, Monty. Something like 5 years. 5-6 years, this guy had to sit out in the RLs, and he's come back now. And by the way, even now when he's come back and he's on one of the worst teams, people wouldn't know this. He's one of the best junglers in the whole league. He's really good. But because he's on like the second worst team, it looks like he's shit. So like there's a perfect example for you. If basically fucking up 5 years ago, slightly, and on a really bad team that if we looked into, probably had all sorts of mitigating circumstances, like all the financial stuff around their team and the fact that Specky's mum was running it and didn't have any of the legacy players. Like if that can ruin your career and it can't make you have baggage, I don't blame these guys, Monty. I actually think they're sort of right. Here's the thing, I don't think it's as simple as like you can always sit out. Eventually you have to take some opportunity that's presented to you. But I'm with them. If you know the opportunity really is, like I'm probably going to lose loads of games, not be relevant. And if I get unlucky with a specific teammate being wrong, my own game, like, by the way, jungler's probably the worst example of this, because you can just look like shit if your team's terrible. I mean, the joke is now Synchron looks amazing and his team's still terrible. Like, if anything, this motherfucker's doing it the hard way, and he really is trying to ice skate uphill. Like, but I don't blame them, and I think unfortunately that's going to be what's going to crush talent pipelines to these leagues, because you can already see in the ERLs, like, mate, the top ERL teams are way better than like fucking Astralis in LEC. It's actually a joke at this point. Like the amount of talent that's at the top of the ERLs that either is going to come in next year or just doesn't want to come in at the moment, like we're saying for these bad teams. It's actually kind of weird because think about it, nothing like that exists in like LCK. No one's like intentionally chilling in Challenger. Like, well, I don't want to go yet. No, don't put me in LCK yet. Like, that their whole league is just a talent pipeline to the top, constantly. Same to some degree with LPL. In LPL, it's more just a billion players that might keep you up. But in the West, in both ways, we've got our own problems, I think. Because I've also heard a similar thing, Monty, that basically there's players in the modern day where, especially from orgs like Cloud9, where you might actually get real starting time one day, or if you're lucky, maybe you can get like half a split if they have an issue with someone. Some of the people really do feel like, I'd rather just chill on the academy squad of Cloud9, hope I get some sort of gigs or better experience. Why would I jump straight onto, like, I mean, sad thing is I say a name now, it's going to not make sense because all the teams are upside down this year, but in past years, teams like CLG, well, they'll stick with CLG, these obviously aren't going to be top orgs, are they? They're not going to be relevant to the championship.
Well, I think also what's important to note too is that it also depends on how the academy teams are used. So if you want good practice, right, and you want to become a better player and eventually get that big paycheck, you have to weigh, like, is being on Cloud9's academy team. Cloud9 regularly promotes players to their main roster. We've seen that. They have a very effective talent pipeline. And you get guaranteed scrims because of their internal scrim system versus the C9 regular team. Now, if you are a bottom tier LCS team, no one's going to practice with you. That's just
still a thing, by the way. That is still real. Yeah.
I mean, of course not. Like, if you have a choice, you're going to practice versus the better team. Like, it's not.
And you can even argue now, dude, that even might fuck you. Like, now, logically, think about what I just said. If we add the both facts together, if we also now know that the best talent stay at the top of the RL, I'm now even more not going to practice Astralis. Why don't I just practice the top of the RL team instead? So it's actually going to get even worse for those teams that are getting squeezed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Like right. Good teams would rather practice ERL teams. Or like Cloud9, you're going to get guaranteed scrims on Cloud9 Academy versus Cloud9, whereas like pretty sure TSM isn't getting guaranteed scrims against Cloud9, not as frequently, right? So in terms of actual individual development and being able to match up against a top team and top players, if you're a developing top laner, probably pretty fucking good for you that you're able to scrim against Summit a bunch of times. You probably get more time learning from Summit than anybody else. You get access to Summit, so you can ask him questions, right? You get access to the coaches, the good coaches on Cloud9. So I mean, I think it's really hard because of the system that exists to create these environments. And like, this is very different than traditional sports, by the way, because traditional sports, you don't have scrim, you're not practicing against other professional teams. Like that happens very rarely, right? You have like a training camp for a few days in the NFL, maybe with a rival team before preseason, but you're practicing on your own most of the time. And it's just not what happens in League of Legends. It's not what happens in any.
Or you're just not practicing with your team, and it's like an inter-team scrimmage where, there's like 3 stars on there, 2 on this team, and then you balance it. But that's just for people to get the workout through. Obviously, you're not practicing there's no fucking set plays you do with that. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And so it's a really different environment that creates a higher amount of inequality. Now, you could argue that teams with less depth don't get the same amount of practice against themselves, which is an important factor for depth on professional sports teams. But it's just a very, very different world in esports when it comes to practice. And there are inequalities in practice because obviously top teams are going to want to practice against top teams. And that hugely disadvantages bottom tier teams, and it makes it very difficult for them to improve. Frankly, like it's kind of it's a snowball effect that happens. It's like once you start being bad, it's hard to get the practice against the good teams so that you can learn from your mistakes, and you just end up playing fiestas and scrims against bad teams over and over and over again. It's challenging for sure.
What else? What's interesting otherwise in the world at the moment? Because obviously, I'm trying to save all the LEC topics when we have amazing coming up soon. Because we'll go in depth on that. Maybe do you want to talk about some LCK stuff?
Let's talk about LCS because I think Amazing has seen the LCK games.
Right, yeah, that's good. Okay.
So I think like we could probably save some of that stuff for him. I'll give some overview on LCK.
I've got a question for you. I want to ask a question that could potentially be provocative, incendiary, edgy, funny. So on brand. Here's the question, right? Right. As we all know, LS, here's the thing, it's not like LS sits down and composes a statement to be inflammatory. He doesn't actually. It's just like a side skill he happens to have that just goes along with his personality. I know, speaking from personal experience on that one. But here's the thing, right? Every now and then, just because he has so many takes and he does have his own very unique prism on the game, his takes, some of them are obviously slightly off people's, some of them disagree. Every now and then he'll have a take that is really out there for me. So here's one that he has, right? So to me, I just want to get your thoughts on this. He literally had Bjergsen was his number one mid laner. He did a rankings of LCK and LCS like a couple of weeks ago. He had Bjergsen as number one mid laner, and he had Fudge his number two mid laner in LCS. And if you haven't heard, he has said, I mean, when Fudge used to be a top laner last year, LS's famous statement was like he could be the best player in the West. He thinks the same thing now from mid lane. He now thinks of it. Now, I will say, one piece of context people always get wrong with LS is this. Whenever anyone makes a list, my first question is, what was your criteria? Everyone else just goes, no, fine, that'll just make it so we can maybe understand the man. Let's just try and take them in absolute context with no criteria and see how crazy they sound. So I will say, LS's context always includes things like, here's the problem. It's not based only on the official matches in LCS. There's the problem. You can see already how he ends up with really different results, right? So I will say he does take into account things like Monty, how people look when they play in solo queues. So he's trying to get more of an absolute sense of them as a raw player, not influenced by team concept. He definitely takes into account things like, does he like mechanically think they look good? And then a last detail, and this is the most vague one, which I will say seems like the catch-all that covers a lot of the edgy takes. He'll also do something like, I would say it's like almost like semi-intangibles. It's like, what do they do for their team? So as a result, by the way, you can see how immediately people can fucking moonwalk their way out of the Bjergsen one by going, but his experience and his understanding of the
that we can't hear.
you can argue away any bad performance in that sense, can't you? So I want to just get your take on the Fudge angle, because I wondered what you thought of that, because I have to say I think I have a very different take from LS on this one. So where are you at on this one? What do you think of Fudge as a player? Having seen him as the top player and now he's the mid laner currently in Cloud, what do you think of him as a player, as a mid laner?
So here's the other thing about, I think, LS's take on those rankings is that he's probably taking the meta into account, in which case, like, Bjergsen and Fudge are both very effective mid laners in this current meta. This is a pretty passive, I would say, mid meta at the current time. We see a lot more emphasis in the early game placed on how you control objectives, particularly First Herald, as well as carry top laners and these kind of hyper-scaling AD carries. So I do think that Fudge is really fantastic, and Bjergsen is also good at facilitating plays on the map and kind of playing weak side mid lane in the current meta. I will say we don't really know what Bjergsen's capable of right now because we haven't seen him. It's been a common thing on this show, but we haven't really seen him be in a position where he has to carry with Hansama and Whippo on the team. Now, certainly they've lost games because Whippo can be coin flippy at times, and in high pressure situations, if you lose the gold investment because he randomly dies that you place into him in the early game, it does put the team in a really struggling position. So Also, I think it has to be said that the mid lane for LCS has been pretty underwhelming. Like Abadage fell off pretty hard. He's looked a lot better in the last couple of weeks, though. But he really struggled at the start of the split. Takui, I guess, has been surprisingly good. That's like been a pleasant surprise. People were hyped on Jojo Beyond based on his lane performance, but his team fighting and kind of late game positioning still needs a lot of work. And
he was third on the list for LS. He also had him super duper high up and believes in his mechanics or some shit, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he does have good mechanics and he does have good laning. So,
he's raw as fuck. You look at him and you can tell he hasn't got all the pieces to be a top player yet. Come on, man.
Yeah, I think. I think it is. I think it is tough. So, you feel like you don't have a really big standout in the way that you do have Summit and Bwipo kind of a cut above the rest of the top laners right now. And mid is not as impactful. I mean, even on good teams, a lot of the mid lane play is really kind of supportive, or reactionary, like running CC and pick comps like we see from T1. So it's not, I would say, the most like deadly mid lane meta, right? And he's prioritizing more, I would say, supportive or flexible mid laners, because Fudge has played a ton of different champions so far this season. I don't think Fudge is a problem. I think he's been playing his role with the team very well. I think it's been good. I think he's been good.
Right, just because the audio's apparently lagging, we're going to try and switch in region, and I'll give my take. So should we just put it to Europe, basically?
Yep, we'll do it right now. Let's see.
Is it back? Are we back?
We're back.
Right here, because here's my take. I find this so bizarre as a take, because my whole reason I was actually cool with Fudge moving to mid lane was because he was going to have LS as his coach. I actually thought that was the part that made sense, because I thought, right, this is a player that LS has been like quite directly involved with and clearly gets along with. They share a philosophy on the game, including these like weird pinches and where you can go in the draft and things you can do with unique champion picks and comps other people aren't running. He's willing to first time stuff, not just because he's an LS acolyte, but because he hasn't played the fucking role before. So why not first time stuff? It's even an edge that makes sense in the short term. And then this is the last detail. If you even look how he plays mid lane, he looks like a bloody top laner, because half the time when things aren't going that great, he just plays like mildly conservative, and then he never seems to go as ham as you can as a mid laner, because in top lane that just gets you fucking killed in the longest lane in the game over and over again unless you have jungle help. So my problem is this: I agree with you. If you look in the context of the LCS, well, of course, he's one of the better players. Mid lane is arguably the worst role in the whole fucking league. And as you said, even some big names like Bjergsen and Abadagi haven't really been very good, quite frankly. But they are the best because there's just no other talent. There is no Jensen, there is no Jasuke. There aren't other people there. Like, as you said, the Takui guy, take the nameplates off. He actually might have just been the best raw mid laner. Like, I actually see now why a couple of years ago he actually had the hype before Vethio joined the RL. Everyone was the LCS. Everyone was saying it should have been this guy, apparently, coming from like the French scene or whatever. So I can see that, but the part I find whack is this, is like, we've got to get out of this LCS bubble, guys. Right? These comps work precisely why everyone gets away with the Bjergsen excuse, because you're mid in ADC if you're on Cloud9 or Team Liquid, fucking body everyone else in the league, and would do that, by the way, if they were 1v9 in or if they had help anyway, because they're so much better individually than the others. My problem is this, Monty. You take Cloud9 right now, drop them into LEC. You know what? Summit will still do fine. Berserker will have a bit of a harder time, because I think ADC is actually a very stacked role in Europe. Mate, Fudge would just get fucking chewed up. Like, absolutely. Half of his games, he's just an okay mid laner. Like, he's not some star player. As I said, the region just sucks. Like, think about how good mid laners are in Europe. This guy wouldn't fucking hang. I know people are going to say that's haterism, but I'm talking about eye test. Eye test alone, I don't think he can match us up, mate. I'm a bit concerned if Cloud9 ends up winning. Like, I don't really know which way I want to go with that, because I feel like Bjergsen or Fudge is going to just be a bit underwhelming if you go to MSI, you know. I've just seen, I mean, obviously I haven't seen the playoffs. Yes, there's going to be a lot of series to potentially level up, but like the player I've seen so far, mate, these guys will get murdered by whoever comes to the LPL or LCK. This will be a joke.
I mean, I think honestly, one of the biggest issues with Cloud9, because remember, they didn't finish the season strong. Like, they beat Dignitas, but they got absolutely pounded by 100 Thieves, and then they lost to FlyQuest. But honestly, like, as exciting as the drafts were at the start of the season with LS there, they became very concerning in the last few weeks with some of these losses. I can't tell if it's... I mean, I assume they wanted to win the game versus FlyQuest so that they would have a chance to end as first seed. So I can't really say that they didn't care about this last game of the day. But I think it's concerning with how strong Blue Side is right now, that when you literally lost to a Malphite the day before, you then go and you blind pick your solo lanes, knowing that Malphite is up, and then you end up in a scenario where you're playing Tryndamere into a Malphite. Like that's really concerning. Also, it's a little odd when they kind of first picked Zeri, which is pretty common if it's left up on the blue side, obviously, throughout the regions in the world. And then you leave it up for the second game and you prioritize the Lee Sin. When you don't, you have some dive pressure, like with Tryndamere post 6 and obviously with the LeBlanc, but it just seems like pulling the Zeri there is probably the better pick. And then you end up, if you're Cloud9, moving towards the Ezreal lane because so many of the kind of meta AD carries have been selected already. And we did see a lot of Ezreal and Misfortune this last week, partially due to ADC bans and partially because of a meta shift that I think we'll kind of talk about a little bit later on, and also partially because there was the interesting thing about best of 5 series that we talked about last week with Odo Omne is that there tends to be a meta that develops in that series. So Ezreal like randomly became a very kind of high priority pick in Dom 1 versus Gen.G in that LCK matchup. But I think it was really odd to see this composition in this draft from Cloud9, and I don't really understand why you feel like Tryndamere is such a blindable pick from FlyQuest. Like, I get the Kumo's played it this season, but he's been pretty up and down, and certainly you would expect Summit to be the stronger
Most
top
players,
lane.
as far as I can tell, even if they play Tryndamere, can't blind it because there's just certain matchups they're not as good at. Like, because if you don't know, by the way, as a random aside, I have an unusual amount of actual interest in this topic because on my Discord, one of my main Patreon guys, Monty, actually is a guy who is an NA Challenger player who is a one-trick Tryndamere for years and years. So I'm able to actually for the last 2 years get all this like mad insight into like how like is Chovy playing it well, and basically he always says that like even to this day, most of the NA pros actually aren't very good at like exploiting the champion or like riding the edge of the ult and stuff. Like loads of them don't understand like laning concepts basically. So I have to say I still don't get why in LCS that's considered such like a monster pick. As far as I can tell, it's just that people don't know how to play against it. It's not that the people playing it are that good in that sense, you know. That's why my analogy would be like the old Bjergsen and Zillion. It wasn't actually a good pick even. It's just that he specifically could just do shit and people just, they were like a dog being shown a card trick, like they have no idea what he was doing, did they? I had a question actually along the ADC angle, by the way, because obviously with like the patch coming up now, like it's going to be interesting to see what potentially happens with the ADCs, right? My question is this: when I watch the LEC playoffs, dude, here's the main thing I don't get, right? Again, I'm coming from a layman's position on what looks strong and what the eye test tells me, what wins the games. Why is everyone like hard forcing fucking Xayah as a thing? I'm not making this about LEC only, but if you noticed that, Monty, like this last few weeks, it's like people just. I wonder again, is this a scrim thing? Because it's like people just decided we're back like 3 years ago and this is low-key the best ADC. Because think about how strong the picks in the meta are right now. Fucking Zeri. If you can get that fucking Jinx, it's always good. Fuck it, you can even go Caitlyn in certain matchups. Aphelios obviously still played. Why are people like, I was seeing it like almost every single series had 2 or 3 games of Xayah, dude. What do you think it was?
I actually think it's not bad for the following reasons. And this is what I would consider a meta development that's happening kind of around the world. First off, Xayah, I think it has over a 60% win rate in LCK right now, and a lot of these picks have been more recent. So there are a couple reasons I think this is happening. First off, you can kind of get away with the laning phase with Xayah because a lot of these scaling kind of AD carries exist, right? And you have to think about what Xayah's strengths are that make her more unique. Like she offers potentially a lot of crowd control depending on how you pull your feathers back and you know the ability to create multiple crowd control situations. And the other thing is that when you see so many of these pick compositions coming into play, Xayah is extremely good if you can get some feathers down and force somebody to play into you. In the same way that MF is very strong with bullet time, when you can actually force people to play into you. And if you can deny a pick, one of the things that happens a lot of the time too is these pick comps are very reliant on specific cooldowns, whether that's like Ahri ult plus Everfrost. And if you can dodge that ability with a Xayah ult, then a lot of the pick threat goes way, 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 way
Right.
down. So I think it's important to remember that when you have certain long range abilities that you need to hit if you are running some of these pick compositions, that the Xayah can dodge these abilities and does have a lot of strength as a team fight goes on. So it's like if you can get some of the feathers down and you can dodge like a critical crowd control and then they play into you, then all of a sudden your feathers are down, they're playing into you, you can then pull them all back and have, a huge ult basically, or I mean a huge E. And that will help you set up to win a fight. So I think part of it is frankly just her untargetability.
By the way, bearing in mind, usually I'm I'm not a huge fan of League of Legends, the game. I don't give a fuck about the lore. And I think half the champions are just whack / they are just Dota champ heroes with different fucking names, aren't they? I'll actually give credit. I actually think Xayah is one of the more cool, like aesthetic and like conceptual designs they made. Actually, I think it's a pretty good idea. The idea of the fly, essentially the dynamic of like you have to sort of like think about is someone getting in the way of an angle coming back towards. I think that's a really cool, like unique, especially for ADC, dude. That's a pretty like good way to make a unique champion.
Yeah, also she has piercing, so that makes it really interesting too for large amounts of AoE, both in lane and in team fights. She can control the wave really well as a result, because you have agency about when you kind of pierce through minions and when you're going to push the lane, which is another thing. Like she provides a level of early priority. So I think my best guess is that it's a reaction to what has been happening within the overall meta. And teams want this untargetability and they want this kind of zone control that Xayah offers so that you can contest objectives and dodge the initial attempt at a pick. So I think MF is a little bit different in that she still offers the kind of AoE damage if you play into her, and she's more of a lane bully, so you can kind of press advantages early on. But we've also seen after kind of not being around as much for a little bit. I mean, the year started with a lot of Ezreal Karma, and then all of a sudden this Gen.G Damwon game was back with a lot of Ezreal Karma for like really kind of abusive lane bullying. So I think it's probably just the meta shifting a little bit overall, and people trying to find a long enough time having gone by and people trying to find alternatives to Jinx Aphelios or like counters to Jinx Aphelios. Sometimes it just takes a while for people to remember these.
I will say though, one thing I do again, because since we're always so critical, and I know it's everyone by default is critical, obviously you balance things and stuff. Another thing I'll give credit to is I actually have a vibe now, Monty. You remember in the going into the summer of last year in the playoffs, it was when the meta again was like really wide open, you could play a lot. I actually have a similar vibe right now. Like, I actually feel like you go look at these comps. I think the amount of champion diversity is pretty healthy right now in the pro meta. Like, you aren't doing that thing where it's like, right, you take the you take the Corki, then I have to take a Xayah. Right, you are taking Aphelios, well, then I will take the fucking Senna. And, like, it's not like that. Like, now they're actually, like, dude, you can go for quite a lot of different comps, I feel like, right now. What's your vibe?
You can. I'm not. It's going to be really interesting, I think, to see the T1 Gen.G finals, because there are pretty different styles between the two teams.
Sure.
Like T1 has a really. I mean, we talked about this on previous shows, and we actually saw Fnatic run something very similar to a T1 comp in Game 1 of their LEC series this last weekend, which I tweeted about as it would happen. But for those of you who were not here, basically what T1 does is that they typically have a poke champion in the lineup, and then they typically have some form of engage. Typically, this comes from Kyria on Nautilus at support, for example, and then they have some form of reset. And the reason why they do this is because they're so good at controlling objectives and they're so good at landing these long-range skill shots and poke that when they set up at an objective early, they can poke you, then long-range engage on you, and then basically snowball the fight with a reset champ. Or what they do is they find you in a side lane alone and then engage on you from like a quarter of the map away, which we also saw in T1's kind of composition versus Kwangdong Freecs from this last week. If you guys were watching that game, like you can see these long range engages coming in with like Nocturne ult and Jinx rocket, and then just somebody just randomly. I mean, you can think you're perfectly safe under a turret, and then you just get one shot, basically. So there, it's really challenging, and there are champs that have these long range engages. It's why Faker's playing Kaise. It's why Faker's playing Vex. It's why he's playing Corki. It's why he's playing Ahri, because he can come over these walls and really surprise you and punish you really hard. And then for reset champs, they've kind of run the gamut as well. Sometimes they play Viego, sometimes they play Aurelia. Most of the time they play Jinx. That's been Gumayushi's kind of go-to champion with this roster. And it allows a lot of versatility. Now, this is really execution heavy, which is why you don't see a lot of teams doing it. The comms it takes to pull off some of these like dives or some of these like side lane picks are crazy. Like you have to have 3 people oftentimes within range, and then basically perfectly execute from like a screen away a lot of their abilities. And it is very strong when done well. The question is whether that, whether T1 is going to be able to execute it against other top tier teams in the world, considering that, let's just say I was not filled with confidence by watching the Gen.G DWG KIA series this last week. So I think the big question is what they're doing like the ideal way to play the meta? Because there's almost a lot of the time, it feels like there's no counterplay. It feels like you're standing under turret or you're standing in a lane and then all of a sudden you're dead and then they take an objective. And very, very difficult to do that, to deal with that. I think the way to play against it is that you have to kind of be a mind reader and know where they're going to go or anticipate where they're going, set a bait in a side lane for them, but they may not engage if they don't see you on the map or they don't have you in vision. It's tough. It's tough. So
the problem is if people are, like, because obviously it hasn't really been the meta for many years now, but if people have never seen poker comps like that, this is a problem I feel like people don't explain well enough on the broadcast. The problem with the poke comp is always this. When it's working, yes, it looks OP as fuck because it's essentially like, if people don't know, like I'll give you a classic analogy. So in the 80s, Monty, when the United Kingdom was at war with Argentina over the Falkland Islands, the reason why it was essentially like an easy war to win is supposedly basically the battle, because obviously the Navy of England's its most famous part, right, of the military. Their ships could just fire further. So you just pulled up to the Argentinian boat and you knew their range was like, I'm going to make up a number, I'm not obviously a guy who knows about this, let's say their range was a mile, Monty. You had a ship that could shoot 2 miles, so you just pulled up a mile out of their range and just shelled the shit out of them while they were just shooting down here, right? So essentially that's what happens again in the support comp, right? It looks OP as fuck, but here's the part that a fan doesn't realise. Like you're saying, the execution required though, you are walking a fucking tightrope the whole time, because as people know, they ever get a flank off on you, they ever close that distance and they fuck your champions up, because most of those champions, you'll notice, nearly always are mega fragile. Like if you're fucking Jace or something, everyone knows what happens to Jace when you get melee range on this motherfucker. So like I think people really underestimate like you say, how hard it is to actually execute. Like it ain't as simple as watch that game and go, oh, let's copy and paste this comp. You would fail it so hard. And then B, as the great thing about a pick comp is it's mega OP right up until the second it starts to fall apart, and then it's shit. It's absolute shit. Like, by the way, try being behind one of those comps and not being able to execute it. You'll just look like a moron who can't ever do anything in the game. We've seen plenty of times when people tried this.
Or if you're not on objectives first.
Yeah, exactly. You just look like an idiot watching them take it, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, there are other strengths of T1 as well. Like, the way that they maximize gold on the map is actually insane. Like, they just know all of the trades to make in terms of macro plays and like what to give up and then go to the other side of the map and they get twice as much back. It's fucking absurd. So there are other win conditions they have, but T1 basically just plays a punish style right now. They play a punish style, which requires you to make mistakes, by the way. It does. Like you have to be vulnerable, put yourself in a vulnerable state to be destroyed by their comps a lot of the time. So if you play a game where you minimize your own vulnerability, I'm not sure how much T1 would do, would be my conclusion here. And that's not to say that, it's really, really difficult to do that. But yeah.
Should we bring him as on then?
Yeah,
we'll bring LCK with him. So we'll
talk about LCK with him. We'll bring him as again. We'll switch over and try and fix some of these audio issue guys.
Right, we're back with Amazing as our guest. We're going to be talking about both the LEC, which is obviously Amazing's home region, but also the LCK, because obviously we had these really hype semi-finals matchups, and actually it's potentially created a unique storyline for the finals that will maybe redeem the LCK season, or maybe the same narrative will continue and T1 will complete the undefeated season, which everyone's hoping for. Right, I want to ask, oh, by the way, just at the outset, what is actually your current status, Amazing? Because I know before you were obviously doing you were assistant coach in Misfits, then you were the content creator. Are you just a guy in a hat now? Like, are you with anyone? What's the current status? I don't know what's going on right now.
I'm just hiding my receding hairline at this point.
Okay.
Yeah. No, current status is no, I've started to play again. So basically practice and everything like that. So maybe by summer I'll be competing again. But quite
do you want to be in LEC again?
I don't think I have the hands for that at this point, but
okay.
I think
maybe
we settle for regional league at this point and then see how next year goes. But yeah.
Do you actually, by the way, do you want to play like for your own validation? Like you still want to prove something? Do you want to play to try and like bring other people up or something? Like, essentially, do you want to kind of be like a Yellow Star figure? You know, when he went to the RLs and he even played a bit to bring people up to speed?
I think it's more for own validation. Like, I mean, when I temporarily retired, whatever it is at the time after one of these, or like actually, I mean, I retired like 3 times in a row. So, but at the times, I always felt like that I wasn't quite ready for retirement, and then the Misfits coaching gig happened, and then I had some interesting experience overall as a coach that I completely was driven away from it. So at this point, I'm like, well, if I think about my future, I just want to do something that is fun, right? That actually kind of does something for me, and playing does it more so than anything else that I've done in my life so far. And content creation and being a coach isn't something that I can see myself be at all. Quite frankly, it's just not me.
What didn't you vibe with about coaching? Seems like it would be up your alley. I mean, you seem like the way you break the game down would make sense. You seem like you can communicate with players. Is there something? What was turning off about it?
Oh man, a lot of things. I mean, it probably depends on the structure they have in place too, right? So if you're a coach that is someone that is, I mean, I know my type of being. It's very. I mean, you guys like to talk about Reggie. I'm like maybe a tuned down version of him in a way that I'm.
Not a lot of people describe themselves as like Reginald in the current climate, but very brave. Okay, keep going.
I'll take it. I'll take the heat. It's what it is.
Okay.
No, but what I mean by that is I need a structure in place that for me does allow me to be whoever I want. And whenever I did that as a player too, I mean, I was in Origin, then even in one of these, even Schalke, like they allowed me to be whoever I want to be. And that really helped me out, and that really let me like just succeed, right? And then suddenly get into a different coaching structure, despite having the prior information on all sides, and you have a mismatch in expectations despite the knowledge being there, right? And I talked about this with in context of LS2, right? If you hire someone and you have like a basically an overall process in hiring, you have to know what kind of personnel you bring in, right? And as someone like me, who probably is more demanding than anyone else in the crew, you need to give that person more leverage or some kind of freedom in every which way, and that didn't seem to be something that's really like I would say almost within the climate of the current landscape of esports, where the coaches are extensions of the teams and the organizations. They don't necessarily become free flying mavericks in a way where they can do whatever they want to and basically operate however they want to. The only one in the West that I can see actually having that kind of freedom may actually be Reaper, where you give him that kind of freedom and he operates, and that's what it is. So I think a lot of teams don't operate under that agenda, and they want to have some kind of up to bottom top to bottom manipulation basically happening, where they can dictate whatever's happening. And I think that's where I myself don't like. It's I'm not a corporate guy. I know this at this point.
Sounds like you don't want to be a cog in a machine. You want it to kind of be like a director where it's your vision, you know, and you can kind of implement your philosophy, right?
Yeah, whether it's right or wrong is something to be determined, right? But having that freedom is something that I personally need, and I think over time I've realized is quite friendly, and it's too frustrating to play or like to operate in teams where I can't have that, you know. And I think maybe I should have realized that sooner. Maybe I should have realized it like years ago. But
I feel exactly the same way. Amazing. I feel exactly the same way.
Yeah, but the crazy thing is, he's
you and I are still you and I are going through the identical crisis right now.
Yeah, but Nick, he's literally a German, and he's telling you he doesn't want to be a cog in a machine and have a hierarchical top-down own autocratic system. He wants to have one. Well, the joke is he does want an autocratic system, but he wants to be the autocrat. He wants to be the guy. I get it. You know, obviously, don't take that analogy too far. You know, within League of Legends context here. No, but the thing is, though, I sort of agree with you. By the way, this is something I've actually found has been a big turn-off to a lot of people in coaching, is that they come in thinking like, well, you know, maybe I might not succeed if I don't do a good job. And then you find out sometimes you don't even get to implement your ideas always. And the worst part of all, and I have to say, this is a killer I've noticed for a lot of my friends who were in coaching, is at the end, you still get the blame as if you had all the power and as if you made all those decisions. And so that's the least satisfying part, because if you ever end up with a team that's not very good, you kind of feel like I had my hands tied and this isn't what I wanted to do anyway, but I'm being treated as though this was like I chose all this. Like I wanted all these players. I wanted them to play this way. I wanted to, you know, discipline a player that way and bench him that way. And so, yeah, it sounds like there's unfortunately, I have to say, in the modern day, it feels like the coach could be a scapegoat for everything else in the org at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends from org to org, but I think the overall concept is simply that the coaching is an unforgiving role. And when I was a player, I think I disrespected the coaching role too, to a certain extent, despite me not. I mean, only once I actually advocated for a coach being kicked, and that was the good old Fnatic days. But it's more about that you need to have you need to give him some kind of authority, and then it has to be kind of like determined by both the organization and the players themselves, and it has to basically like be negotiated all the time. And I think that's not properly happening within most esports orgs as I've seen it. And they either simply go for the top-down hierarchy and that's it, or they let it be player run. And I think both concepts are. They need more negotiation. There needs to be something in the middle that actually works for both parties, because the coach being nothing is as bad as being as a coach being everything. It just doesn't work, to my estimation.
Yeah, agreed.
Unless you're...
To me, they're just complementary components. You know, the question is just how much are we going to balance it, and even that I think ties back into it. Depends what your coach is, doesn't it? Like if you have a coach who really does just come from a system, yeah, you can plug him into yours and you can tell him what to do. But if you bring in someone on, like the obvious example is like the LS is the ultimate example. It's like if you're bringing him in, why are you bringing him in just to join a coaching structure? Surely you're bringing him in because you want what he brings to the table. So you're gonna actually have to, in some ways, you could even argue this is what Cloud9 didn't do. You're gonna have to actually dismantle some of your existing structure to make space for that guy to be able to implement all the things he might have in mind, you know.
Yeah, and that is something. I mean, especially with Cloud9 situation. I mean, I don't know if you guys you probably talked about it a lot, but that irritated me from the outset. Obviously, I still have no idea about the intrinsic things that happened or that occurred. But when you bring in someone like LS, who's quite frankly, maybe, I mean, to my estimation, still on the very extreme side in terms of the hypotheticals that he's working with.
Sure.
Irregardless of that, like his ideas have seen some fruition, or like they have come to fruition in some situations. And if you don't allow this person to be who they are, well, then you're not getting everything that this person could grant you anyway, right? So and maybe a half-assed version is actually a no-assed version in some situations, with other coaches who are less.
When it comes to LS, it's either the whole ass or no ass. You know the rules.
Amazing. Look, I think that when it comes to LS, he also is somebody like us who is not going to fit well within an existing structure. And there was no way in hell that Cloud9 was going to compromise the structure that works for them. You know, I'm sure that you know, they do have flexibility, but like if you look at, and every time I say this, people just accuse me of being some Cloud9 apologist. I am not saying a judgment here, guys. I'm simply explaining how Cloud9 works to you, and you can choose to take this information and go to whatever conclusion you want to.
By the way, Monty, I never normally check on Twitch because I don't use Twitch at all. Like I never even stream if people don't know, right? But because I do have the name that people might guess might be my name on Twitch, I've just looked, and you know when you have those notifications at the top, I was like, why would I have a notification? And I clicked it, and it says that yesterday someone has just troll gifted me a sub to Nemesis's stream. It's okay, well played, whoever that was. Well played. I don't know why you've done it or why it was yesterday, because I wasn't even streaming. I'm not even on Twitch, but well played. You got me on that one. Yeah. I saw that and did go, I've subscribed. Oh, it's a gifted one, right? Okay.
Congrats on your Nemesis subscription.
Yeah, they got me on that one.
Maybe it was a Gen.G celebration subscription for you.
Could have been something like that, yes.
After their win. Anyway, no, but like I think, you know, Cloud9, what they do is they have a system that includes like this performance psychologist that they really trust. it's the same shit they always do. It's like people are going to work out in the morning. Like they have a trainer come to the Cloud9 facility
within the org, right?
Yeah, and you work out with the team and you have a set structure and the way you do things. And like I think that Cloud9 actually did give LS insane freedom. Like everybody's like, well, why would you hire LS? Well, first off, guys, we've had this conversation. People are different in real life than they are on the internet. I'm not sure Jack and LS had ever actually met prior to.
That's a good question, actually. Yeah, it's wild.
I'm not sure if they had because of the pandemic.
2016 or when he was on Gravity, maybe at the time.
Yeah, it would have been a long time if it was because of the pandemic, right? So there was no in-person meeting that happened before this. And Cloud9 is one of the teams that lives and practices in the same place, which amplifies any kind of inconsistencies, right? It has benefits as well. You have, a lot of camaraderie when you're around each other all the time. But if things start to go wrong, they can snowball really, really fast in that environment because you're living and working in the exact same place. They kind of run the OG team house system. So these are the things, I still don't have a full picture of what happened. I do have some idea at this point. And what I will say about it is it seemed like Cloud9 really likes to have a structure. Jack is basically the owner of Cloud9, but he's also the GM of the team, and he needs to be included in things. And I think that, Jack's scheduling dictates a lot of what the team can do in terms of structure. And if it's going to go outside of that, then it causes problems. I know that's vague.
Here's the problem. I'll give you an analogy, boys and girls. You know the classic analogy where there's a saying in English, right, which is like, say you're in a bar in England and you see a bunch of hot girls come into the bar and they're all getting drinks.
That doesn't happen in England, by the way.
Whatever. You come from Germany, mate. I wouldn't worry about it. So when they come in, right, obviously you look down and then the idea is if you see one that's hot, the way you say it is you say, I wouldn't kick their ass out of bed in the morning. Because the idea is like, wow, this looks so attractive. But here's the flaw that you make. Because in that moment, your mind's more in like the hunter-gatherer mode of like you're looking for a vector. In this case, obviously it's a vector for reproduction. You look in, right? You see them. In that moment, you're just seeing like the best of them. They're attractive. You see the qualities that look good. You imagine what they might be like as a person. The problem is the reality of that person could be completely different than your expectations. So all I would say is this, right, is I see this happen a lot with young men where they think that like the most attractive or the most beautiful looking woman, somehow that like elevates that person to like a 10 out of 10. It's like you haven't even met them yet. They're not anything out of 10. You don't know them as much. All you know is their raw looks or how attractive they are. What you might find is there's like a famous thing people used to have, which is like, the hottest girl in the world. Yeah, there's some guy who's actually fucking sick of her shit. Like, some people might be high maintenance, believe it or not. Crazy idea. Imagine that. Imagine a beautiful woman in a bar might be high maintenance. She might actually have demands of you. She might have lots of suitors and as a result be able to make big demands. It's the same with someone like LS. You might love the idea of having that guy. Yeah. And by the way, all the upside of like he's going to have wacky ideas and he's going to bring a different vision and all. But you know what? There might be downsides that you can't know until you've ever worked with the person. Like, for example, in the analogy with the hot girl, maybe it's great in a bar where you just out with her, but maybe she's really insecure about something. Maybe you have to be around her all the time or reassure her. Like, you can't know what level of maintenance someone has and what particular idiosyncrasies they have as a person. So to me, the main problem with that whole topic was there's no like transition phase. You can't take LS and go, right, we're going to start you at like a limited capacity. Yeah, you have to basically either just go all in with him and take everything that's part of the LS experience, or you had to basically do like this and say, oh, you're out completely. Because if people don't know, the other reason I thought this move was silly is he only did it because it was the dream job. It was every single little check mark checked for right now. Realistically, like the fact that when he was left, he was like, well, I won't coach another team. It's like, I don't really know if this ever should have been attempted then. It's a bit like when T1 was going to sign him. I was mad with how T1 handled it, but I also thought it was silly that they were just going to elevate him from, I once coached a fucking challenger team and Gravity 7 years ago to like, you are now Faker's coach. Go and win worlds. I always thought that was crazy in itself. Like, what? Where's the fucking step up from this? Like, so 1 minute I'm like, pick Annie, always go, oh, Faker, yeah, we're going to be doing this now. Like, what are you talking about? What's the connection there? So to me, luckily, I've sort of reached closure with that whole topic now, because essentially what I've decided is it never long-term could have worked. So we just ripped the Band-Aid off at the beginning. So it sucks we didn't get a whole split, but I'm not that bothered anymore by it. I was really mad at the beginning, but I sort of got past it.
I'll also say, like, Ellis is a very different person on his stream than he is in real life, guys. And like, of course that's expected. I'm not saying that Ellis, I quite like Ellis personally. But he is really different than the persona that you see, is what I'll say. So, you know, I think it's hard to judge him based off of that persona that he puts on for the stream versus kind of who he is and who many of us are in our day-to-day lives when we're not on camera, right? Many of us are very different people. So who knows? Like, it could have been an unexpected personality conflict that may have occurred. And I think that in general, both Jack and Ellis are very well-meaning people, but, you know, sometimes you could have conflicts if you haven't met or worked together before.
It's a bit like when Amazing had that perception of us from summoning Insight, and he thought we were one way. He thought we were just cynical assholes who hate TSM and only make fun of them all the time just for no reason. And he was wrong.
Do you think that changed?
There was a reason. We just really didn't like TSM. That was it. Listen, it was all true. It was actually all true. Now there are certain different. Especially, here's the other thing people don't know is, like, it's also one thing you can never know till you've met people is you don't know what the dynamic's like when you have a conversation with them. You know, like, streaming's like a one-sided dialogue, isn't it? They're just doing it. They have all the say over it. You're just sat there passively consuming it. You don't know what it's like to work with someone and get in a convo with them. I even find it with interviews, by the way. Sometimes in an interview, when you start talking to a player, you're like, wow, it's really different than I expected, even though I've seen a million interviews of this guy, because I just wasn't the one in the dynamic at the time. Right, let's flip over then. Here's what I think we do. Talk a bit about LCK, because we already set that up before the whole topic. And then we'll go to LEC after that. We'll do the whole playoff stuff. So basically, in LCK, we're basically focusing on the semi-finals here. By the way, if anyone hasn't been following LCK for a few years, if you're like, why is there a semi-final? You mean the gauntlet? Get your fucking head in the game. That's been out of the game for ages now. That was years ago, you fucking idiot. So there's now a real playoff format in LCK. It's just that, spoiler, last year it didn't matter because there was only one bloody good team, wasn't there? And the other team was Peanut. Well, then again, he's back in me, so I guess I can pretend he's good again. Yeah, he's back. Like every time, unless you properly fucking stake the body and, you know, fucking cut the head off and silver bullet. Like, apparently he's always back after these chokes. He's back again. But yeah, basically now is one of the rare times again where the semi-finals matters. Like, if you saw this semi-final between Gen.G and the other one, like, it was fucking insane. By the way, the fact that, like, if people don't know, the KDF team even making it there the round before was insane. Their match against DRX, like, oh, it was all over the place, all these matches. So to me, the cool thing is this: one, there's a really interesting discussion about the Gen.G match. And then the coolest part, and I'll set it up now, is, as we've said on this show before, the one part that sort of ruined KT's unbeaten run, T1 rather, is that they never played the real Gen.G lineup because there was always people who were ill. So we're going to get to see them play in the bloody grand final in a best of 5. That actually low-key sort of backdoored into a really insane narrative, because you've now got two scenarios. Either maybe T1 does win and go undefeated, which will now mean something in the final, or they don't and they finally get some resistance. So start wherever you like on this. What are you thinking about the current state of what you've seen so far from LCK, Amazing?
I mean, overall, definitely in terms of the global, I mean, I guess like a comparison towards especially LEC and SES, I think they're very far ahead, especially the top tier teams. I mean, as you said, like T1 and Gen.G as well as Diamond, like they're all really far ahead in terms of mechanical ability, even in the early games. What I see where, despite the early 40 minutes basically being pre-planned all the time, right? We have this like the set timer with the plates going down. You have the set timers with the TPs going up and basically being able to utilize them towards what it is. They still seem to find avenues in every single way to actually make plays. And I think for especially the Gen.G and Demon series, like showed that really, really well, where level 2 gang priorities were actually still there. Almost callbacks to old seasons of like season 4, season 5, especially season 4, season 6, I would say, where the teams operate on a very I suppose a coordinated scale in the early game, and I think they have now found a way to utilize the control that they have within the first 14 minutes to actually make something happen and really like find the intrinsic kind of loopholes within the organized structure to actually make things happen. And I think that's fascinating to me. Like, I've not been as impressed by any region in a long time as I've been with the LCK, like recently at least, I would say.
Okay.
Well, yeah, he was a really integral part.
What do you think, Monty, on this regard?
Yeah, I think the Dom 1 Gen.G series, I mean, we can choose one to talk about
do it.
first.
Yeah, go on.
Let's
This one.
get let's get T1 out of the way first, because I think the longer conversation is Gen.G Dom 1 because it was a much closer series. T1 obviously just running through the semifinal. I think it was extremely convincing versus Kwangdong. They didn't really show anything, I would say, new. They continue, as we alluded to before, to play a lot of these like long range poke, pick off, reset comps that we've seen them run in the past. We did get to see a little bit of Gumayushi Xayah in this series, but for the most part, it's going back to Jinx for the resets. I think you can see a lot of what I was talking about earlier. If you want an example of how these kind of long-range comps work, I would say watch Game 3, because you're going to see things like Faker, like KIA and Nautilus will just ult somebody, and then Faker will shoot from off the screen with Vex, and then Gumayushi will just shoot a rocket at them, and they just explode. And, you know, there's like certain one-shots that happen. Or you'll see the Nocturne ult come in with like a Vex skill shot, and then the rocket comes in and somebody explodes, like Teddy explodes under the turret with the Misfortune, who doesn't have any of these kind of movement abilities. So you really see the power of these long range pick compositions, and they get a lot of the champions that they want. I mean, Xayah has been playing an overwhelming amount of Jace this season. If you try and execute some of these bans against them to stop them from doing certain things, there's enough depth to the pool that they can pull other things out. It's like, if you start to ban all their poke champs, they'll just play Varus, as we saw last week. Varus got a few buffs. It's not ideal, but they really, really like playing out the mid game and the late game in one way, and they will figure out, they'll do enough gymnastics in the draft to be able to get this over and over and over again. So they've effectively proven that it is very, very hard to ban them out from running these strategies. And nobody is really giving them, I mean, honestly, like they don't seem to prioritize like a lot of the normal picks, but nobody's like giving them Twisted Fate either. So you have to ban out certain power picks, and then they're still able to have enough flexibility to pull out all of these compositions that sort of can operate in the same way. So the win conditions often end up very clear for T1, and they're pretty consistent game to game, which allows them then to focus on execution and cross-map trading, because they know how to play out the comp in terms of the team fights and in terms of objective control. So I think that frees up their comms a lot of the time to figure out how to get gold. And as I was also alluding to earlier, one of the spectacular strengths of T1 right now is their macro is so good that they will sack objectives and then get twice as much back. It seems like every time. It's like, how did they fucking get this 3,000 gold lead in this game? It appears to be pretty even, but when you start to dig down, it's pretty crazy.
Whenever I watch them, like to me, what fascinates me about them is as I said, like this. I mean, the trading part, but also the effortlessness with which how they get the leads, right? It's not, you cannot really determine like one part where like, okay, this is how they always get the lead. It's more of a continuous climb every single minute, and at some point they suddenly accumulate a 3k goal lead, and simply based on jungle timers very well, like especially Owner, like the way that he's playing and how they utilize him too. It's his resets are really well timed, and they utilize those resets to basically just like allow lanes to push out. Like you walk him along the way, you let him reset, you switch sides again, then you walk with the support, whatever his control river, control the next objective, and it seemed like everything that they do is like really, it's so meditated to the point that they actually know what they're going to do with the next 2 minutes compared to most other teams, which are only operating with the next 20 to 30 seconds, if anything. So I don't know, like for me, T1, in terms of like their ability to actually dictate the map, it really reminds me of old T1, like especially the 2015 one, maybe even the 2013 one. Like the comparisons are there, and they may actually be equally good in terms of their individual dominance right now in the LCK.
The problem I have,
to see how it is for the world, but yeah.
Is obviously at the moment they are still in the position where they actually might be able to complete the perfect split, like everyone's going to see in the final. I personally don't think they can do it now, because I imagine at least one game goes to Gen.G. But the problem I have is this, Monty. Dude, even this fucking semi has an asterisk. Like, That should have been DRX playing them there. If you watch the LCK season, DRX is a better team, and there was some mad fuckery in Game 5 of the KDF DRX season. If no one saw, like, they like stole the fucking, like, oh, there was all sorts of fuck shit happening in that game. Just go watch it. Like, it's not like KDF's terrible.
But here's
DRX was never going to beat T1, but they at least could have given them some sort of fucking challenge.
I mean, but you could also have the opposite argument, which is that DWG KIA should be in the final instead of Gen.G because of like, the extreme fuckery of Game 5, right? And even some of the other games in the series, like Gen.G is extremely lucky to have won that series at all. They probably should have lost it like 3-1 if we're being realistic. But I think a lot of the T1 stuff is like they have a very telegraphed style. Like, you know what they're going to do. They love to get first Herald. Their Herald percentage is first in the LCK at 71%, and they are third last in first Dragon percentage, whereas Gen.G is first. And I think that's what sets up a really interesting final between these two teams, is that Gen.G is a Dragon priority team, and T1 is a Herald priority team. And so there's going to be a lot of, I think, very interesting stuff that happens in this series. And I think the worst matchup for Gen.G is actually Damwon. Like, as weird as that sounds, like, there's a possibility, there are weaknesses here against T1 that could, in theory, be exploited by Gen.G, especially if Gen.G starts to go for early Dragons stacking and like puts a timer, like a very early, like 20-minute timer on like Soul or Soul Point, where T1 could, in theory, run into problems because of early Dragon stacking. So I'm curious if T1 is going to change their priority, or if they're going to continue to kind of play the way that they do and accumulate these early gold leads and then snowball very effectively around them. Because the styles are super, super different between what teams prioritize and between the two teams in the finals.
I mean, I do think that Gen.G needs to fight, or like literally try to adapt to the early game playstyle, like especially of Owner. When I saw the Game 5, especially, like, they should have not gotten away with it. Game 2, they should have not gotten away with it. Like, Game 2, they were also down, I think, 3K, 4K, if I remember correctly. And both of these games were simply dictated by the fact that enemy had sometimes literally threw. And if you rely on that against someone like T1, who's way better executing, to my estimation, than Dem1 is, they don't make mistakes when it comes down to the mid to late game. They will not get these comeback wins. So I would actually say that Peanut will probably, or like the overall Gen.G style will actually change towards probably playing more and more on Peanut, like trying to allow him to be maybe in the jungle carry, similar to how Demon actually played, and actually like have that happen, because that little pick in Game 5, for example, should have worked out and should have dominated the game and should have actually ended the game, but it didn't. So
I've got a good analogy for you.
Gold bounties.
Like, basically,
it's a disgusting mechanic. Like, just remove it ASAP.
No, I want to discuss this in a second, but I'll set it up like this, right? Years and years ago, literally, we talk like 10 years ago now, there was a fight in the UFC, and one of the things is, because from esports, I'm totally cool with spoilers. Like, I want to watch how it happened, not what the result is. Like, I'm fine with being spoiled. I basically had that thing where, because the UFC was always on it, like, it used to start at 3 a.m. in the UK, so I would often just wake up the next day, go to a website and watch the game, right? And unfortunately, when I did this, right, I was going to watch the fight between Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen, the first one that happened, right? And if people don't know, this was like a really epic fight, but it was mega unexpected because the underdog was basically winning this fight for 4.5 out of 5 rounds. And what happened was, when I was going to the site, sadly, I saw a fucking spoiler very briefly before I clicked the video, where like I basically saw it said Anderson Silva wins the fight, right? So you'll see where this analogy is going if you know the fight I'm talking about. So I sit down and I'm watching the fight, and right, remember, all I've gotten spoiled at this point, Amazing, is the winner. I don't know how he does it yet. And in this fight, like I say, for 4.5 of the rounds, the guy who was supposed to lose this fight is just dominating. Like, he's constantly in top position. He's ground and pound. He's winning on the feet. He's never, ever in danger, right? So I'm watching it, and I'm actually starting to think at one point in time, like, was that fake news or something? Was that like an old fight? What did they? There's no way this guy. And then what happened was, out of nowhere, right? Anderson Silva did a triangle choke and won the fight at the end of the fight, right? So the same thing happened today, Monty. I woke up. I didn't watch this game live. It was on in the morning. I woke up and I saw the result. And it said Gen.G wins in the 5th game, right? And when I was watching the 5th game, I've posted on YouTube the video from it, right? When I was watching the fucking 5th game. It's the same thing. I'm watching, I'm going, This must be, they must be talking about a different game because
Yep.
Peanut, he's so far behind in this game. They can't win. Like, look, he's basically just getting like fucking his soul owned. He hasn't even had any farm for the first like 4 minutes. So I'm like, there's no way. Yeah. And also, we all think Kanye's like the best jungler in the world. He might be the best Korean player along with Keria. Like, I was like, they must just win this. And the same thing, I was just watching the whole thing. Like, how are they possibly going to lose this game? Like, mate, there's two things we have to talk about in this game. One, this Nidalee pick, because you can see how fragile this shit is right now if it ever goes south. And then two, it's like the discussion we were having before bounties the other week, Monty. You in the modern day, and this is going to be really, really hard for League of Legends players. If you're in the position Peanut is in, you can't play like this was 3 years ago and it's any time in the game. You actually have to play it differently in your decision making, depending on the bounties and the situation in the game. Like you actually have to factor that in, and no players doing it because it's a new world in that regard. Like essentially, if people don't know, it was very easy how they gave this game away. And it actually shows, like, I think people have seen this in a bunch of regions now. Because I saw Peter Dunn was complaining about this. It feels like there isn't, that depending on what time in the game it is, your ability to lose the game can be incredibly different to other points in the match. Like, what do you think about this topic? Because to me, it's making the game a lot different from old League of Legends.
I mean, I personally really don't like the bounty system. And as Peter Dunn, he said this in comparison with, like, he made a scale, right, between 1 and 10.
I thought his tweet was really good.
It was very insightful, yeah.
Yeah, and it was like the way that explained this is something that we've seen in the past too, right? We had some metas, for example, in season 8. I think there was a summer meta where you had the comeback mechanics in the jungle, where basically if you were like even a level down or even just a bit of XP down, you suddenly got like transported way further.
Catch up XP,
yeah, through every camp. So that meant like even counterpicks for historical counterpicks such as Kindred into Sejuani or Olaf into Sejuani didn't actually work that well because simply Sejuani would just take one more camp and suddenly should be very much at your level. So you had to kind of understand, well, why would I play a 1 comp or like I think he explained like 10 was the fastest comp, whatever it is. Let's say 10 is the fastest comp. Why would I play a 10 comp if I can get away with like a 3-4 comp every single game and just play slower and be okay with it? And I think now it's partially the same, though it is very much it feels more volatile than it has in the past. Like the consistency in bounties is obviously there. We obviously know the gold accumulation at some point. We know that, okay, well, they're the bounties, they do this and whatever it is. But it still doesn't feel real when you're actually playing the game because it feels so volatile. So when you're playing the game, and that's what I've noticed as I've been practicing more and more again, is that you play, you get ahead, you get like a 7k gold lead, 8k gold lead by 20 minutes, and suddenly you have like one bounty like being struck. And the way that it's being struck compared to how impactful it is feels really off. So bounty is struck suddenly like a K further, or only 7k ahead instead of 8k ahead, and it doesn't seem to have the same effect as taking the Nashor, while actually in terms of gold value almost is like the same in some situations, right? So for me, that is the weirdest thing ever. Or losing a turret, like losing all 5 plates, is kind of the same gold value that you're always almost seeing in some bounty systems. So for me, that feels really fucking weird to actually see because the game feels too volatile and it doesn't feel trackable to the point that you actually just have to rely on late game and be like, okay, we're just going to hope that we're going to win at some point because that is a safer system. Because in case we do something wrong, these bounty systems will carry us to the goal. And I think it has to become more consistent in a way that, I mean, the impact versus like what's happening on the map has to be a lot greater. Like if a bounty is hit, for example, like you literally have to have your ears ring or whatever it is, and the noise has to be louder, or something has to happen that you get like a flash up on the screen. It's like minus 1,000 gold or whatever it is, so like plus 1,000 gold, whatever it is. And it has to be more impactful, and that's what it is. In most of the pro games, you see the same way. Like people shy away from this because they are scared and they don't know. They simply don't know. They don't understand the impact of these bounties within the moment. And I think the best example of it was the G2 Misfits game where they threw like 3-4 times in a row, and they didn't realize at any point that they were threatened to the point that they were. They didn't know because it was so hard to track. Like you just didn't know. You don't. It's not the same as it used to be, where the comeback XP maybe did something. Maybe some of the shutdowns that you got. The bounties make it untrackable and make the jumps way more grave. That's what it is. It's jumps. It's not a scale. It's literally jump from one to another. And at some point, you're down in gold where you shouldn't be, just because you played well earlier.
Well, the game also
I will say, like, as even though obviously I'm not a player, so I can't claim to know from that side. I also find them very counterintuitive how the bounties are calculated. Like the amount of times you see a game where the mid lane is up 15 CS and he has the bounty with like a 0-0-2 scoreline, and then the jungler's like 4-1 and 2 on Olaf, and you're like, why doesn't he have a bounty? Like you're like, I don't even know if it's intuitive how they're calculated, dude.
No, I mean, when you're playing, like, it doesn't feel intuitive because it doesn't seem as if it actually tracks the very game state. And one has to understand too, there are multiple game states at the same time, right? It's first of all you have the gold, then you have the and at some point when you accumulate enough gold, you obviously have the item differences happening. But vice versa, you also have the scaling difference in the champions, right? And like the level difference, whatever. So like 4 or 5 different scales in which in which the game's operating on, and you literally have like one thing that is tracking one thing only, but it impacts every single other scale. So for me, that is like the wild part about it.
I mean, I've seen gold bounties pop up because the team has Dragon Soul, even though they're 1k gold ahead.
Yeah.
I mean,
it just sucks.
Like, and the thing is that the game itself doesn't. Like, the problem is that League of Legends, and part of what your job is as a professional player or commentator or analyst, is that you need to be able to evaluate the game state because gold is worth different amounts depending on items and champions that exist in the game. And so the whole thing is that you could have an even game state with a 5,000 gold lead and in the mid game because you need that 5,000 gold in order to make the game even. And that's the purpose of selecting this composition. Yeah. And to explain Peter Dunn's point, what he tweeted out was like, imagine there's a scale from 1 to 10, and 1 is like the biggest scaling composition, and 10 is like the biggest early composition. The point that he makes is that you usually, like, what you're trying to do a lot of the time is like, if a team picks like a 7 or an 8, so a pretty early game composition, you want to try and land at like a 6, right? So that you have like a slight scaling advantage, but can kind of keep up in the early game. And that would be like the sweet spot, for example. Obviously, this is a simplification, guys, but it's useful for discussing the game in its current state. And what he says is basically that he doesn't feel right now that you can even pick like 8 through 10, like very early game compositions, because the rubber band mechanics are so severe. It was, by the way, guys, it was always a risk. It was always a risk to take early game compositions versus scaling compositions, because there was a huge risk that if you misplay in the mid and late game, that the comeback would start before gold bounty has existed. And then they introduced champion gold bounties, and now they introduce objective gold bounties. So it's like it's multiplying like the level of comeback potential. And sure, there were things that we can talk about Damwon doing wrong in that game.
Of course, yeah.
Should they have punished Peanut as hard when there are already comeback mechanics in the jungle and he's playing Hecarim and it's going to be relevant because he has an E and an ult later on anyway? Should they have started dragon stacking earlier? Probably they should have done that. I would say that
they also fucked up a bunch of team fights against Chovy, etc.
They fucked up a bunch of team fights. They overpressed their advantage. They gave 1,000 gold shutdown over to ruler Xayah, which was a huge misplay on an individual level by Canyon. There were problems, but like Canyon shouldn't have to absolutely dominate this game and die once and then they're back in it. Like, that's unacceptable. Like, how good of a performance does this guy have to have in order for that? You know, he can't make 0 mistakes in a game. That's like humanly impossible.
If this was like 7 years ago, the beginning of the game starts like that. Spoiler, it just keeps going like that, and he is in the Nightmare Simulator, Peanut, and the game ends, and he's had the most humiliating beatdown ever in a game final. Like, there's no comeback from that like 7 years ago. Like, it's over. Like, in fact, the people might remember the classic MSI Fnatic series where everyone remembers, remember everyone was killing. Everyone forgets, like, Game 5 was the one where they, like, fucking triple buffed, like, Cyanide or whatever, and just left him in, like, Rainover, rather, and they would, with Nunu, and they just couldn't play the game, and T1 just shit stomped them. Like, that was going to happen in this game except for these mechanics.
Yeah,
because the reason I bring it up, right, is that this might sound like a weird point because it's abstract, but players can't take account of information that isn't tied to the game experience. This happens right now in my native game of CSGO. In CSGO, right, we have a problem with the economy currently, where basically it's not enough that the counter-terrorist wins the round. His guns are more expensive. So he also has to stay alive and win the round. But no one plays that way because your entire life playing Counter-Strike tells you just the round, isn't it? The round's the score. So as long as we win the round, we win the round, right? That's good. But it isn't always as good as it needs to be. And basically, I think the same thing's going to happen in League. You can't, like a player, I'm sorry, especially the fucking jungler, he can't be totally cognizant of all times, as well as the map, what the lane states are, what the current macro situation, he can, timers on Herald, and he can't also be going, and of course, I might have a shutdown on me, and then they have a bounty, like, he can't be doing the fucking numbers meme of like the numbers mason, the numbers, like, he's just a fucking human playing a video game. Like, it's all well and good going, you know, players should adapt. Like, this is too much, I think. I don't think a player can keep that information. Because as I say, it's kind of like, it's not directly connected to your game experience. Nothing like, put it this way, it's not like your champion feels stronger in the game. So intuitively, you know, wow, I must have like a shutdown if I get killed. No, I don't think, I think basically, this will just affect games like this, but I don't think a player can really. I don't think you can counterplay it in a way. I don't think. I know it's possible, but I don't think it's reasonable to expect even pros to think this way.
But it's not, especially because, like, sure, in retrospect, we can say, well, you know, they probably should have started the dragon stacking earlier. Like, they probably really should have, with their poke composition, focused on this objective and not pursued Peanut so much, because there is catch-up XP in the jungle that Peanut can earn. It's like, you can only suppress him for so long is the reality of it. Like, after that first clear, I think you got to find something better for Canyon to do with his time and start stacking those objectives. However, in the moment of the game, it feels so right. Like, when I'm watching it, I'm like, holy shit, you know, this is going well.
Dude, think about how many games you've played against a fucking Hecarim comp, and you're thinking, dude, if we can keep this guy down early, it's over. But like, every other game's telling you, play this way, you're winning, you can't win against you.
I mean, it's like they weren't making bad decisions.
No.
You know, in terms of snowballing, they were making extremely good decisions. So let's just put this out there. Like, let's put everything in context, okay? You have the Ziggs in the bot lane. You've got to push onto the Ornn with the Renekton in the top lane. You have freedom to invade both sides of the jungle. Canyon can basically do whatever he wants, go wherever he pleases. They even get a kill on Chovy in the mid lane, so Showmaker starts to get up, right? Now, if you're going to be in this situation, they're trying to expand their gold lead very quickly. So they're prioritizing. It's not that they weren't doing nothing, guys. It's that they were prioritizing killing turrets. They got all the plates in the game. They have a Ziggs with a satchel charge. So what they were doing is they were moving the Ziggs from lane to lane to go ahead and bust down all these turrets. They get the Heralds. Now, crucially, one thing that you'll notice they don't do is put the Herald in the bot lane, because they don't want to accidentally take the inhibitor when there's only one turret left in the bot lane. Then they move top, put the Herald in the top lane, take that turret, and then it crashes into the inhibitor turret. So they're very systematically moving the Ziggs around the map and taking every single little bit of gold, trying to get all that gold from the tier 2 turrets in the side lanes, trying to get all the plate damage. They're using the Ziggs very well. Now, what is the cost of this, right? Because you have to have the Ziggs and the Jace and the Nidalee in the same lane, because they're trying to poke people off the turrets and take these objectives. What ends up happening is that you get a lot of farm onto Ruler as a result. He is up by like 100 CS by the time that he starts to like come online and get super powerful. He's got 3 items, you know, by the end of this sequence, and that allows the door to be open, especially when he gets like 1,000 gold shutdown onto the Nidalee, and they're able to start coming back. But it's not like Damwon was doing a bad job of snowballing. Like, they weren't. No. But it's only in retrospect that we could say that, because I don't think people in the game would have called their decision-making bad. It was using Ziggs satchel charge in the lead that they had to snowball, get a fuck ton of gold from the map, and they weren't even doing dumb shit like taking inhibitors. They weren't even, like, they were thinking about that and saying, we're not going to take this inhibitor, we're not going to drop the Herald here, we're going to use it somewhere else. It was a really beautiful game to watch, honestly. And like, the fact that we have to nitpick this and say that, holy shit, it was actually possible to come back in this game. Like, there is a fundamental problem with the game mechanics if it is possible to come back without a titanic error. And Damwon did not make a titanic error in this game.
But here's the analogy, because I know fans are thinking like, yeah, but it's not that one thing that no, but that one thing made the game almost even, and then the following mistakes lost the game. This is like if in football you're up 4-0 at half time, but in the second half each goal's worth 4 goals, so you score 1 time. It's not like, what the fuck was I playing for in the first half? Like, you know, that's just stupid at that point. That's what it feels like right now, is basically the analogy, if people don't get it.
Yeah, and look, there were problems with Dom 1. Like, they were missing a lot of skill shots. They weren't landing the Diddley Spears. They weren't landing the Shock Blast from Jace. They weren't landing the Ziggs
Showmaker
poke.
was definitely missing a fucking everything, wasn't he? You know?
Yeah, so like, had they been able to hit their poke, that could have changed the outcome of the game as well. But again, we're talking about a beautiful macro sequence that resulted in a 10,000 gold lead that should be rewarded more than it was within this game.
Yeah. No, that's what it is. And as you pointed out, it's simply that you basically have to calculate how far you want to snowball instead of like just do I want to, like, we have to snowball. Like, that should be the equation. Should be, do we have to snowball? Yes, our comp requires that. But at this point, you have to keep track of like the two things, right? It's a jungle XP. Like, if you're 2 levels down, you suddenly get the jungle XP, come back, and you have the comeback XP. And the same way as the inhibitor, like, too, in the bounty system too, like the inhibitor system is also really broken if we think about it. Why would one be punished if one takes an inhib too early? Like, that is actually a punishment. That shouldn't be the case. You literally have to send one guy to that lane that you take an inhib on and hope that he gets the XP of the dying minions, because the jungle XP actually doesn't, because again of the fact that junglers as well as laners get different amount of XPs in the enemy jungle, and you set the enemy jungle far behind, you literally, by snowball in the enemy jungle and taking the jungle camps, you put your own team in jeopardy of giving free jungle XP out again. And the inhib minions that are now crashing into your nexus. So it's like, why would one implement this and continuously try to kill off the early game potential without, like, what is the design behind it? And that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, I have not had an answer to it, because to me, the early game items do feel a bit strong. I think that's probably it. But it also should just be, then you just have to nerf the items, or have to nerf how XP works in the early game. I mean, something has to happen, something has to change. It cannot be the way that it is now, where you get punished for being too good, like in a lot of ways. You're being punished for being too good initially, and if you make one mistake, that is worse than being too good earlier.
Yeah.
Also doesn't fit with, like, here's one of my problems I've always had is I don't believe, like, the game dev doesn't have to explain themselves, but if you do attempt to explain yourself, I will listen to the reasons and in good faith apply it. And if I find you full of shit, then I'll call you out on it. So here's the problem I have, right? Here's the problem, Monty. Why can we never have nice things in League of Legends? Because the game has to look like the solo queue experience, Monty. In solo queue, every fucking elo ADC is taking that inhib if it is available. Every single time, because in his brain, he doesn't even understand macroning. He's low elo. He just thinks it's better. I took his inhib. Right? You're now doing pro games where, as we're talking, it is now incorrect to take inhibitors at certain points in time. So how does that fit with your whole thing that's going to look like casual play? It's nothing like casual play. This is, by the way, just as bad as the old lane swaps. It's just as bad as lane swaps that you all wanted out of the game. Like, that'll never make sense to a casual either, even though I was very powerful for pro player.
I mean, it's crazy that Ruler could get up by that much CS while not even having the inhib down, right? And imagine how much worse it would have been had the inhibitor be down in that circumstance. Now, again, part of it is going to be Yuumi is a gross, disgusting scaling champion.
Helps. That certainly helps.
Certainly,
you notice, by the way, 2 of the biggest comebacks of the season, Monty.
The Misfits
Yuumi,
one as well.
You'll notice it did have a little steroid accelerator pad on that fucking blue shell, didn't it? Exactly.
It's also, I think, the composition, like, it's really hard for the Leona or Renekton to actually not just get completely owned by Yuumi Xayah. Like, we saw a lot of the picks coming off onto the Killen's Leona in the last game, because they just kind of stand there and they didn't really have super good engage. So if the poke isn't landing, the tanks just kind of have to stand there and get poked themselves over time, or get CC'd and then kind of focused down by the composition that we saw from Gen.G. So, they had to catch the game, and like they did do it extremely well. If you look at it, like, especially actually collecting resources on the map in a very difficult situation, Ruler was extraordinary this game. Like, it's not possible without Ruler getting all that farm, and he did it really, really well in a tough situation. But I think it is disappointing to see games like this, because after watching this, who the fuck is going to play an early game composition ever again? Yeah. Like, I'm scared off of this forever after watching that game if I'm a professional team. At this level of stakes in an LCK semifinal with this level of dominance, and frankly, like, not that many mistakes, and you still get your ass handed to you, like, it's the value just isn't there. The value is not there.
By the way, one thing I did think this series showed, though, so we'll tie it in if you want, we can talk about the final, and then after that we'll go to LEC. Basically, another thing, because right now anyone who saw LEC playoffs knows that, like, spoiler, thus far at least, Caps actually hasn't shown up as the old Caps that everyone's still praying comes back. He's just a different player at the moment, and is like, I would just say like the carry threat is just drastically reduced. He's not like a monster player he once was. He's just a good mid laner now, right? Dude, Showmaker's giving me the same fucking vibe in LCK this split. Yes, his teammates are worse. Yes, the meta is different. This guy was being, remember, before they lost that final, people were putting him next to Faker, Rookie, like the greatest players of all time. They were asking how many more worlds does he have to win before Showmaker can be the GOAT. So this is one of the things I always say about these players. People will always make this mistake. When they compare a legendary player who's had his whole career to a player who was in his prime now, they always make the mistake of not getting. Well, at the end, your career has like a bell curve. You know, you're at the beginning, you're at your peak, and everyone almost ends lower down. That's why you retire. So the problem people have is when you're in the middle at the peak, Caps, Showmaker, you think it never end. You think he'll always be that good. Or you think even if he gets worse, he'll be the second best. He'll be 9 out of 10 instead of 10 out of 10. What this shows is these are just humans. Like, it's very rare you're going to get players like Rookie and Uzi and think like go that many years. Like, even other great players are going to have a year or two that are really good, and then they're going to have a split that's down or a split that's a slump, or they don't have the right team. Because, like, Showmaker right now, nobody would think this guy was the best in the world after that series. It's over.
Or the split.
For now. You know. So I have the same vibe with him. Like, this guy was on top of the world, but far from it right now. Far from it.
Look, I think that Dom1's actually in a kind of rough spot. Because you
got to chop a bunch of these players, dude.
No. I think you just need to get Nuggery back, frankly, because they ended up in a top carry meta where it was very difficult for them to play through the top lane. I mean, you see that in this series. They replace Birdall with Xayah. Xayah hasn't played a stage match since January. You know, like, he's been gone for a long time, and they put him in game 3 of a semifinal match, and yeah, comes in, actually does a lot of good work on the Camille, right? Yeah. It's not that he played well. He got caught out on the Camille a few times. Like, he made mistakes that were costly in terms of split pushing, but his individual power, especially in the laning phase, you can see that their game plan was suddenly switched to trying to accelerate through the top lane, which is the way that a lot of good teams are playing right now. But you have to have the player to do that. And it's been tough for them. And I think that, you know, I think Gen.G also has issues in the top lane.
Everyone does.
Yeah. I mean, Xayah is good. Keen's pretty good, but Keen is not on the greatest roster right now. But it's kind of a weaker top lane split overall. Rascal had a very good season, but he's on a garbage team. So we can't have like a lot of the good players good top laners on the top rosters. And I think that if there is a glaring flaw in this series, maybe Xayah can become that guy in time, right? But he's still not playing he doesn't play with his lead super well compared to a lot of other top laners. And how can you expect him to do that in a high pressure situation where he's just thrown into game 3? Like, it's not really fair to him either. And I also don't even necessarily believe that Birdall was a huge issue in the Malphite game that ostensibly got him benched, because the Malphite wasn't really good into the Gen.G Cup. It was good in lane versus Jace, but it's, you know, they picked it really early, and then Gen.G countered with a Kaisa pick, and it's like, then Malphite had to build, like, he built Chem Tank, Merc Treads, and then went Force of Nature, which, like, that just fucking feels bad on Malphite. Like, that feels bad. And so I think they kind of overplayed the Malphite in the draft into a composition that still had flexibility in order to get around it. And then Dom1 also set themselves up in a lot of bad positions and re-engaged fights when Malphite didn't have ultimate. And it was pretty easy, I think, for Gen.G to play a kite game against them, and they had enough upfront CC to stop the Malphite. So this is all to say that I don't really think that was Birdall's fault. I think it was like a team and draft fault. Like, they played it badly as a team.
Here's the problem though, Monty. Birdall, I made a video about this recently. Birdall can't be just okay though. Who is he replacing? Fucking Nagori and Khan, two of the greatest players ever to play the position in the history of the game.
It's not good, right?
And this team's entire identity, the whole time they've been down one, is we are the top side of the map. Our whole fucking shit is the mid laner and jungle of the shit, and hopefully the top lane is really good. So you bring in Birdall, a guy who just inted his face off on Gen.G at fucking Worlds. Brilliant, yeah. This guy almost let European teams get out the fucking group. That's what he was all about. So,
Oh my God.
and also you say that, Monty, they just have to introduce one of the best top laners of all time. Like, oh, is that all? Like, fucking hell. Like, we can fix a lot of teams.
I
like,
mean,
give me the shopping list and that money, I'll go fix half the teams in the world.
But my point is like this team really wanted to play through carry top in this series. That's why Hoya went in, right? And because that's the meta. And like we can chain this later on into what did Odo Omni say on this show last week? Well, no teams in Europe are really playing through the top lane carries. What happened this last week in LEC playoffs? Well, a lot more teams were playing through the top lane, including Rogue, and playing top lane carries, much more so than we saw during the regular split. That has been a big change in Europe. That was certainly, part of the shift that we saw as they changed patches, but also as they had time to kind of digest the other regions. So clearly, Dom1 said, us playing, the Malphite top lane or playing weak side top or playing just kind of counterpicking the top lane, let's put it that way, but maybe not having the ideal pick. That's not how we want to play. We want to play for a kind of split push composition with the Camille. We want to play through the top lane. We want to have the Renekton famous, combo with Nidalee so that we can accelerate this early game so that Canyon can have pressure and can invade and we can get these leads. It was a clear game plan. And like, I don't think you can fault the game plan that Dom1 had, but it would have been objectively better with Noguri, right? And Noguri took a break. I fully anticipate Noguri to come back for summer on this Dom1 roster because I think he was, from what I understand, he was close to signing anyway and coming back to Dom1 before he decided that he needed a little bit of a break. But
it sounded like he had some like mental health thing going on. It didn't sound like it was not wanting to play. Yeah.
But if you're Noguri and you're watching this series, you can't, if you're a real competitor, you can't help but want to come back. You're like, oh my God, these guys were one game away from the finals. I get to play carries in this meta as long as this meta persists, which it should because of TP changes, frankly. Like, I think we can continue to see this because unless they revert TP changes, but I don't think a lot of patching is necessarily going to change kind of the ability for top laners to carry. So if I'm Noguri and I'm looking at this, I'm like, licking my lips. I want to come back into this game. I want to, show how good I am. I want to challenge T1 in a meaningful way. And I like Dokdom and Kellen. I think that they were, they showed a lot last year in terms of their performance. I think that maybe it feels kind of bad to use the Ziggs in this game, but they used the Ziggs well with the way that they wanted to play out this game. I'm not sure it's necessarily Dokdom's meta because he's known as like this Ezreal monster. And we talked about it a little bit earlier, but Ezreal like randomly became a priority pick because of the Ezreal karma emphasis that both of these teams wanted to go for. But that was I think that was a micro meta just in this best of 5 and not really reflective of how many other teams are going to be playing their series on this patch. But I don't know. I think it looks like time for Noguri to come back, and the storyline would be absolutely insane if T1 wins this season and then Noguri's like, I'm here to challenge your dominance and end the streak, right? That's pretty baller. Also, Rascal can come back to Gen.G. That
The problem is, I wanted to ask us, what do you think? Like, I'm assuming everyone's picking T1 to win the final. So the real question for me now is just, do they go undefeated? Can they 3-0 the final?
I don't think so.
It really, I mean, quite frankly, I think Gen.G has had, I mean, I don't think they will have any kind of grand comebacks, but I do think there will be one game where there's going to be slight misexecution at some point, or they're going to have it's the cheesy Hecarim comeback after being 20 CS down or whatever it is, and actually make one play, and then it turns a bit, because they do have the individual ability to actually challenge T1 in some roles, at least I would say, in the mid to late game. It's not like they're bad at team fighting. They're pretty good at team fighting. They actually understand their roles pretty clearly. The only difference is that their early to mid game execution seems to be lackluster compared to T1's, where it's really surgical. So I don't know. I think 3-1. I would call it T1 3-1.
Yeah, I think there are ways to win. There are ways to win. I mean, I alluded to them earlier. Gen.G is a early dragon focused team. That's been their identity. If they opt into handshake trades with T1, who wants to go for the early Herald, and they force an extremely early dragon stack, I honestly do wonder whether T1 is going to do stuff like ban Karma, because having Ezreal Karma and having hard shove lanes allows you to have an easier time stacking early dragons. So there is that possibility that there could just be an early soul game or a kind of a disastrous dragon soul fight for T1 if they can't get into position that could, with the right dragon soul, accelerate the game into a win for Gen.G. I think Gen.G will win at least one game.
Because my main issue is, I also think like they should be good for one game. I mean, at the end of the day, we have Chovy and Ruler. Like, you can just have a game where they get their picks and get a couple of kills and in a good spot and win the game. Like, it's not like no one can conceive of a Chovy carry game. My problem is this, though. I actually think the reason it's not as implausible as people think it could be a 3-0 is because I actually think the Korean regional final. I mean, the problem is when I say that now, people are going to think I mean like the old qualifier. I mean just like the final of the domestic league of LCK is one of the ones that has the most 3-0 finals, because when you're down 2-0, the amount of pressure on you, I don't think it's anything like it. I think maybe Worlds should be Worlds finals the only comparison. The amount of time teams are down 0-2 and they just capitulate completely in game 3, even in the draft half the time. Like, that's the reason it could be a 3-0. So I guess we'll see early on if Chovy. I think they have to sort of win one of the first 2 games, basically. If they can do it, look, I still think T1 wins, but I would say, I don't know. I'm kind of torn on which side to go on that one. Kind of torn on that one.
You want
to go to LEC?
Throw the sponsor now.
Let's go to
LEC.
Let's go to LEC. Let's go to LEC.
Yeah, let's go to LEC.
Okay. So first things first. At least in the first series, Rogue didn't choke. That was actually a pretty good series. Looked pretty clean overall.
Yeah, that it really surprised me how bad Misfits were, like, in that series, quite frankly.
Yes.
Like, I mean, there are a lot of rookie blunders, that's for sure. I think even, like, I mean, everyone tweeted about it, like Mithy even acknowledged it. And it's that Zlatan seemed like someone that I saw the same thing in Junkers too. Junkers and him played really similarly, where they kept playing behind their own lanes in a way. And it felt like that they didn't really analyze what kind of set plays they could run, but they rather were opportunistic in a lot of ways, where they saw, well, we could potentially do this if the enemy is bad. I think that's a bad premise for a best of 5 against a well-prepared team, right? And Rogue, every single play that they made was actually quite well executed, besides, I think it was I don't know, it was actually pretty well executed. Marang understood the importance of top lane, especially in comparison to Misfits. Like, Misfits had no idea about how to play when their top lane was threatened to any degree. Their picks didn't really cater to it. Like, the Lee Sin kept ganking, but it doesn't really execute that well. It's more of a mid to bot lane kind of champion that really operates well in the bot side river, where you can get behind the enemy bot lane, like kick them into their team or whatever it is, or utilize mid power to make plays. But that top lane importance really showed up, and I think Misfits has a lot of learning to do if they want to be one of the top tier teams besides in the regular season, because they had a misread on the mid lane too. They didn't quite understand how to play on the mid lane for whatever reason.
That was the weirdest part, right? Because remember, they're coming in with the MVP. They're coming in with the guy who carried like nearly every game that they won this split and tried to carry some of the losses. So, dude, the one thing I was hoping for in this series is at least fucking put all the resources in Vethio. Let's see what he can do, you know. And at least the first 2 games, it felt like they didn't even attempt to do that. Like, what? What are these setups?
I mean, it could be that they're doing practice, and that's maybe what it is. And usually you have to, and I think Oda Amna alluded to it in the kind of like in between meta that you have in the scrim sets, right? It almost seemed to me that they Misfits as well as G2 for some reason had like really similar approaches in the games, where it felt as if they saw something in mid lane that was more of a assist enemy mid laner instead of like utilizing the mid laner to facilitate plays around the map, which is something that T1 obviously does, and other teams do too, where Fnatic was more on the move in every single game that they played compared to G2 as well as Misfits. And we stay with Misfits, especially V2 wasn't enabled because they simply didn't understand how to do it. Like, their bot lane matchups went sour a lot of the times. They didn't really orchestrate any kind of bot side river control ever. And Video was literally left on an island in a way that I haven't seen in a long while, especially from, as you said, like an MVP type caliber, where you have such an insane win condition, you know what he brings, and you simply choose to ignore it. And I think it's a really weird thing to see, because they have been so well prepared throughout the season, where they seem to at least understand the weaknesses of every single team. But Rogue's weakness is simply, well, you try to play to late game, you try to measure early game, you try to basically play the 5 to 6, I guess, or the 4 to 5, slightly outscale them, and then you make something happen in the mid to late game where Rogue is really mistake prone. But they try to match him early game with the picks, but completely got outclassed.
I mean, I think that this was also just like high stakes rookie choking.
Yeah.
I like Zlatan and Mursa played much worse than like, especially Mursa kind of. I mean, this was really painful to watch from a jungle and support perspective.
Actually, because by the way, if people don't know, Zlatan's champion is Lee Sin, and he got it twice in the series. Like that's like a win condition for him, for real.
Yeah. So I think honestly, like part of this is definitely some rookie players who haven't had this level of stress before coming into a very difficult situation. And the problem with Misfits is that if they were going to win a best of 5, someone was always going to have to step up who wasn't VTO.
Yes.
And
well, here's another problem they had, dude.
Oh, yeah.
Go and look at the draft. All Rogue did was cynically, every single time that they were on blue side, they just banned Jinx. Because guess what? If Neon doesn't have Jinx, he ain't going to fucking carry like he did in that game that they did the comeback. Like, I know that sounds like Reddit analysis, Monty. It's like one of the only ways they do a comeback is, but that worked. It works. If you take, it's so powerful. If you take that one tool away, suddenly, like, is he going to carry the whole game on the Xayah? It's going to be harder to get in a position to do it. It's, you know.
I mean, honestly, by the last game too, it just reeks of desperation from Misfits when they're like trying to get this Akali, and they're like, "Please, VTO, save us!" You know,
do something. Yeah.
It's. I mean, they clearly, you can tell that Misfits' game plan was not VTO Akali coming in, but they had totally run out of options by the 4th game in this series.
Yep.
Even though they did manage to win the 3rd game, I do think that was a little bit. It was definitely Rogue taking their
testing, Rogue was like doing the Samson White kind of thing.
Yes.
Where they,
I was gonna say exact, not that comparison, but for those of you who don't know, like that's the comparison when Amazing was playing at Worlds on TSM and they were playing in the quarterfinals, and Samsung White kind of trolled the 3rd game of the series and like did a stupid level 1 invade and then played like idiots with weird picks, basically.
I don't think I don't guess. What do you mean?
I think with this one though, like, you know, pulling out the mid Kaisa when that's been something that really only Faker has done successful so far.
It looked like they were trying to test the waters to me. That was my vibe on that. You know, it's like, well, look, we're up 2-0. We're probably going to win anyway. So why don't we just see if it's viable? And spoil it, didn't work very well. It didn't work very well.
Yeah. So it definitely felt like that was Rogue, like having a lead in this series, trying to get in the heads of their next opponent about what could happen. And, you know, if we can win with the mid Kaisa, well, now you have to take this into consideration. Even if they lose with it, now you have to know that Larson might pick it, right? So it wasn't executed very well. They turn around by the last game. They actually get the Yuumi in this last game as well, which I thought was, you know, it was well executed by them. I think you look at the start of this, you know, if you look at the draft, I think the Yuumi was a really fun pick into the Rakan and Xayah and trying to get a scaling element and allow comp to hyper carry in this game. They go with a really safe, like Orianna Blind, which of course Larson will be very comfortable with. I mean, Malrong was incredibly fun to watch for this entire series. Sure. We can argue about if his builds are good or not until the end of time. Is Chem Tank Zhonya's good on Jarvan? No.
About the message. You sent him a
message. Did he send a message? Yes. Like, you know, sometimes if you're going to use the items, if you're going to use the actives well, it can be difficult to argue with, but I'm not sure that's going to work at like an international level.
Here's one problem I had with this series, and I noticed no one's mentioned this name yet. Right? Do you remember last split in the summer? One of the players who also, I mean, actually all last year, to be fair, he was pretty good. Actually hit it in the top lane last year. Was a pretty good player for Misfits. Like, he ended up being sort of found gold, ended up getting better as the split. Mate, not only was this split bad, this series, fucking boo, get him out the server. This was garbage. What the fuck is
he didn't have any help from his jungler support, which is crucial to the top lane meta right now. So he was going to look worse.
He deserves to be on an island.
Look, he has had a disappointing year compared to last year. I thought he was pretty good last year. I think he's been mediocre this year. Maybe that's just the price of this, you know, playing this top lane meta, but also, as Odo Omni, he basically foreshadowed what came this week, which is he said people aren't playing through the top lane, and then Rogue very, 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 very deliberately played through the top lane in Odo Omni in this series, and it looked better. I think that is the appropriate way to play in the current meta, and I don't think here it has necessarily had that level of support. And if you are going to do that, you have to play topside with your jungle and support. And if your jungle and support are having horrific games, You're
That's
just
what it is.
fucked, man. You're just fucked.
He also, though, here's the thing, though, dude. He also, in my opinion, isn't suited to be an LEC top laner for this reason. He doesn't lose with grace. If he starts losing games, he just feeds. Like, he's the guy. He's reminded me of like old school Hooney. He's either going to carry the game or hit the game. There's no in between. Because guess what? The mentality that causes the carry is the same mentality that ints the fuck out the game. Like, he's playing against Odoamne, the guy who shows you how to fucking lose when it's not the right matchup. You're behind in lane, you're down a kill, you've just been ganked. Like, that's the guy who shows you what to do. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because, like, they were never going to win this series, but this is one of the reasons they were never in it. It's like they couldn't even get the mid lane advantage. Spoiler, they were already playing against the second best mid laner. You needed that to be 100% your total win condition. And even then, it wasn't going to definitely win the series. So to me, it's like, this was such an underwhelming series in general for Misfits. I don't know what they think they accomplished from this, you know.
I mean,
like, what did you learn from this series?
I mean, I learned that Zlatan and Mursa had huge nerves. And if you don't have jungle and support putting pressure on the map and getting you vision, then you just get owned. Like, that's it.
Then they're going to be in trouble in the next fucking series.
That's what it is. I mean, actually, it's more of a greater question, like for what is in future, what the future is in store for Misfits, because quite frankly, they have been playing. I mean, I wouldn't say catch up, but kind of they've been trying to play catch up with the top tier teams for quite a while now, right? That last year where they had the rookies come into play and they performed better and better, and at some point they were actually able to almost make it worse, right? They lost 2-3 against Rogue. Now this year they operated in a similar mindset and literally just sign rookie players that they could then utilize in order to make their team better. And they fought with the same, like they actually became worse. So to me, it's more of a question: is their system of operation actually working, where they try to get away with almost cheating the system by signing rookies similar to how Mad Lions has done it, and then see if it works out. And I don't think that this is a viable strategy if the players themselves still are so unfinished that they have to utilize like strategies that are really singular. Throughout the year they have been playing Jinx on the AD carry role as much as they can. They've been playing Lee Sin as much as they can, which is not inherently bad if you develop alongside, but they clearly haven't. So their champion pool is an issue, and their overarching question is simply, will they be able to play catch up with that in summer? And to me, if this is like kind of a preview for what's to happen in summer, I don't quite see that to happen. And they need to figure out a different way to approach, I suppose, even like, I mean, I don't make too much of the series, but if I see the year and I see last year and I see now the decline almost, just based upon one meta switch, which is that people play more through top lane. Well, that is, if that breaks your team and if that makes you lose this hard and your rookies choke this badly in the playoff system, right? Then you clearly have made wrong calls in some of the hirings that you've made throughout the year. So for me, that is the bigger question at hand. And
I don't know, man. There's no way to know it until you put a rookie in this situation, right? How can you know?
Yeah, but here's what I would say though, Monty, is don't do two then.
Yeah. Well, also, by the way, they do have
Thunder.
That's what I was going to say. They do have Vander sitting on their amateur roster right now. Like, he's literally there. Yeah.
That's also something like, I mean, I've been vocal about this in the past with veteran players versus rookies, is that you get blinded by the benefits that you have throughout the year, right? Like they have more energy in the split,
they're cheaper,
the money.
They're cheaper.
They're cheaper. That's what it is. But they do have a different approach to the regular season, right? Like if you have a veteran like someone like Wunder, for example, who notoriously didn't give an F, like, but then showed up in playoffs to a certain extent. That is the same system that works for most veteran players, especially after year 3, year 4, where they get so used to just play. I mean, you're playing literally 18 games a season, which is not much, but you're playing around, well, it's 5 times 5, 25. It's around 100 scrims. I mean, it's around 100 scrims per month. You have like 300 scrims, whatever, per season, and that's a lot of games, right? And if you get blinded by the work ethic and the ability of certain rookies to go through the grind and then be burned out by playoffs, well, that's a very vast issue that is still very, I mean, occurring within the LEC, especially where they continuously hire rookies and then think that their regular season approach is somehow going to translate to the very playoff system. That just doesn't work that way. And you have, I mean, I don't know how Vander is right now. Like, I was wrong about Soas too. No offense to him, but Soas is like, I mean, kind of at the bottom of the barrel in the German league, whether it's his fault or not, but it's more about the player could be bad right now, and that's why they made that choice. But you have to understand that there is I would rather take a veteran at a 5, and I think there is an upside of a 9, whatever it is, than take a rookie at a 7, and then hope that he continues to be a 7 or like something like that into the playoffs. Because you have seen the upside, you know the definite value of someone. It's kind of weird to just hope that that other person is going to have the same value come playoff time.
What I would say is this, because I actually read an interview Invent Global did with Deficio, which addressed some of these topics. Basically, as far as I can tell, Deficio's trying to do a similar blueprint to last year. Because if people don't remember, what made actually Misfits very bold last year, and the gamble paid off, was that after the spring split, where some of these players didn't look as great, like people like Vethio were way more up and down, and obviously some of the other players weren't as epic as they were in the summer. They stuck with the team, though. That's the key thing. So essentially what they said then is we're playing for summer and to be good for the World's qualification. That was kind of the end goal, right? So they stuck with it, and obviously it paid off. Vethio was way better. You saw most Vazork was an MVP candidate. Like, all these things went really well. So this split, essentially, I think they're trying to do the same thing, because Deficio's explanation for why they didn't pick Vander was very interesting. He basically said that they actually did bring Vander along in the preseason, along with Mercer, and they did kind of like a tryout, and Mercer won the spot. And his reasoning was, he said in the off-season, it turned out that the champions meta for support actually became enormous. You had to play like 15 different champions, and that Mercer did like a really good job, like short-term adapting to them all. But then the other interesting detail was, he said that he'd specifically signed Neon as the AD carry, because he wanted the AD carry to be more vocal, to allow like someone like Mercer, I guess, to like integrate into the role or whatever. So I get like the logic, but essentially what you're saying there is you're also playing for summer again. It's like, right, we're not going to have it from day one. It's not going to be implement the new system. You got to build it up, build trust between the players, learn how to have one person call in this way. And the premise is, I guess he's gambling that at summer they're going to level up from support and jungle, and it's going to be a better team. But the problem is, like, again, kind of like Mad Lion saw, you can't, every gamble can't work. You don't always get the payoff. Everyone doesn't always get 15% better between splits. It might get worse. Who knows?
I mean, depending on the ambitions, that's kind of the question. Like, what is the ambition? Do they want to be a Worlds contender? Then this is clearly not. I mean, it's not going to work out. If we think about even the regional differences in the playoffs, right? If we think about Zlatan's, even at his best rank in EU, he's maybe scratching the top 3, probably rather top 5, top 6.
I think that's more fair. Yeah,
that's probably more like rather there, because Syncroft is obviously better. Jankos was better throughout the regular season too. Like, he played a lot better. And then you have Razork, who's still up there. He's still doing pretty well. Malrang. So yeah, he's barely scratching the top 6, top 7 at this point, especially with his performance. And the Mercer, well, at his best, where is he going to rank, right? Is he below Mickey X at this point even?
Yes.
Probably, right?
Almost certainly, yeah.
Yes.
and if Mickey X is like kind of the barometer that you're measuring himself with, well, then you have a player that is likely, or at best, maybe going to be a top 5 player in his region, and that is usually.
I mean, we can just name them. Like, he's worse than Trimby. He's worse than Targamas. He's worse than Hillisang. Definitely worse than Hillisang. Definitely worse. I would say definitely worse than Mickey. Although Mickey was. We'll talk about his performance. He was very good and very bad in the same series.
Especially.
That's what's wild, though. That would even be what I would say. Dude, remember at the beginning of the split, as XL know, Mickey X wasn't on any team. Imagine if you had Mickey X on the Misfits team.
I mean, imagine
Perfect.
I mean, imagine a lot of things. Like, I still don't understand how this guy went teamless after.
Oh, it's wild, isn't it?
Like, I mean, maybe. I mean, I kind of remember there was some kind of storyline around, like, him, like the offers drying up as the buyout decreased, if I remember correctly. That I think also was I don't remember this correctly, maybe, but I think I read about it where the buyout was decreasing over time, but as the options were drying up, so it was kind of too late for him for the buyout to decrease at that point. But regardless, and we have a meta in which case, like, you have a lot of like really good players not being in LEC, and really meh players, I'm going to say meh, not bad, being in LEC by comparison, right? You had this with Mickey X. Even Reckless, to a certain extent, is disputable. Whether or not you like him or whatever it is
it doesn't matter. He's
better than, like,
the rating MVP,
right? I know, exactly. It was technically from Spring, but yeah.
Oh yeah, technically from Spring. You're right.
Then you have Niski, who's also out there.
Would be an immediate upgrade for a bunch of teams, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think you talked about this too, where the top teams outside of the LEC, right? The ERL teams, especially like someone like K Corp and maybe even something like Fnatic Rising or GL or whatever teams they are, like they have better infrastructure at this point as some of the LEC teams. and they have better players. Like, how is that? I still can't believe that is a thing, and
Well,
that is fascinating to me, because for me it should be that the LEC should continuously try to upgrade throughout their ranks to get the best potential players. But everyone comes in with their agencies to a certain extent. They're like, well, we want to have this, because I do believe that this is better for our roster. But it's like, well, if you ignore a lot of talent because it's inconvenient to sign, or they bring in some baggage, yet they're way better than your players, well, then you have an issue. And I think at least like both, and we talked about this too in the last episode we did together. I think it was like with Rich, actually. We talked about this with Matt Lyons. It's also the same thing. Well, you're signing players that are potentially good against players that are already
Definitely
confirmed good. And I think that is
Well,
something that we see with Misfits
I mean, in
now,
English,
where-
I don't know
it
if you
says
know
a-
this. There's a pretty famous proverb: "A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush." Because
Yeah.
the premise is you have to catch the fucking two in the bush. If you fuck it up, you get zero, don't you? That for some reason that is like alien to people in the LEC. They don't get that
Yeah.
premise.
Well, I mean, they just don't want to pay the money. I mean, there's a reason.
There's
like,
that as well, of course.
they don't want
yes.
to pay the money. Like there's a humanoid and Rezo
I wish
didn't
that
have
was
to
the case,
leave
by the
their
way.
teams. Like they were on really good teams. Humanoid won all the splits last year. Like,
Yeah.
like it's clear that Mad Lions, the reigning back-to-back champions, didn't want to make a competitive offer to keep Humanoid on the roster, because we should assume that Humanoid probably would have stayed on the roster had Mad Lions wanted to make a competitive offer.
You can hate NA teams with their infrastructure and whatever, and their play all you want, but NA teams actually understand this up price that they have to pay for certain players if they have successful careers outside of the League of Legends, outside of playing, right? They would pay that up price for Reckless. They would pay that up price for Niski, just to have that brand and that kind of face on board, and they understand the value of that. And that's something that in EU, which is why I do believe that, I mean, to me, at least like this year, especially, I think the EU level has really dropped. Like, it has significantly dropped to my estimation, where it feels it's far behind the LCK right now. It's far behind the LPL right now. It's actually potentially behind. I've made this point in the preseason, and people didn't like it. Is that I do believe that LEC at this point could potentially be worse overall than the LCS, simply because like there is a
That's
lot
the
of
headline. Write it down. That's the headline. Write it down.
That's the headline.
Move on.
But it's because there's a lot of unused talent, and that talent is used in NA, right? You have that
Except for
talent on the
Jensen,
top.
but sure, okay.
I mean, Jensen. I mean, to be fair, I guess Jensen is one of them. I mean, Pobelta is also out there, but I don't know how good he is right now. But it's that you have like one or two players that are being unused. But in EU, it feels like that there are potentially 10 players per role or 5 players per role that are potentially unused, depending on the situation they could find themselves in. And it's just that the matching pieces are not being put in the right way. Like, a lot of REL teams have better players than some of the bottom tier teams, and it's like it's a lot. And even if you think about like just Niski and Reckless, like these people are franchise players to a certain extent, and they're not being used. So it begs the question, like, and that is kind of the extension of the Misfits problem, is that how far can you get the theory to work in practice, right? And that is an everlasting question. Yet we have some confirmation that the theory only goes so far, and practice is a lot more efficient to go by. So, I mean, to come back to the series, Misfits, if they want to make any kind of headlines like come next, I mean, I guess they play next week, they have a lot of issues to fix, and it's mainly around like trying to calm the nerves, as you said, but it's also, I guess, finding some kind of agency for the players individually, because none of the players were able to do what they wanted at all. Like, Zlatan wasn't able to carry in the early game. He wasn't able to make any plays because he was simply kind of ganked every single game, every single time. Vito wasn't enabled, and Mercer and Neon. I mean, they often relied on comeback wins, but they also had a decent lane phase, which made them quite a formidable force, and they weren't able to do that either. They literally were not playing the game. So for me, that is a really weird thing to see, and they have to do something about it. And it's more than just the play. It's obviously psychological too.
I think for me, it's just been LEC has been behind the meta curve. Like, it only felt like they were playing the meta that the rest of the world was playing, like playing through carry tops this last week. So I mean, maybe they can get good enough at it by MSI, or we see a team that has made these adjustments like Rogue, getting better by that point in time. but it just feels that they, even LCS was heavily playing through a lot of carry top laners, and they felt like they had
who's good enough right now that who like in EU that is actually good enough in the top lane that
That's tough.
could.
Yeah,
because the thing is, in theory, Broken Blade almost is like the one who's been
Yes.
playing through him and getting carries. Beyond that, like Odo Amne, like you see on the JS game, he can do it, but you have to have the jungler play for him, obviously. I don't fully know on Wonder because he just hasn't really been asked to do it that much in Fnatic. In theory, you know, he can from historical reasons. The list's getting pretty short after that. Like, in theory, I guess the Eric guy could last year, but hasn't this year. Like, you're running out of names now because then you're getting into the territories of the Finns of the world. I'm not a huge fan, to be fair. I guess Alfari, in theory, can. There you go. There's one.
Perks,
There's players.
Perks talked about this, I think, in 2020 when they talked about the jungle meta changing between like the regional jungle meta and the world's jungle meta. And
Right.
I do think that in the microcosm of like 1 or 2 weeks, I don't think you can change up your style that you have been playing the all split long. Like the only ones that are maybe adapted, and as you said, as you alluded to, like is Broken Blade because he's already been playing that style. But Odo is like his style is obviously very controlled, and the way that he plays right now is also he's able to carry through top lane, but it's not a volatile carry style. It's not like he breaks the game open and single-handedly carries it. It's more of within the system of the team. So if it's convenient for my rank to go top lane, he goes top lane. But it's not like they're doing this every single time, every single game consciously as a game plan. It's more about a general direction in which they're going. So,
I mean, it was better, but it was only 5 games, right? Or 4 games, right?
Yeah, 4. Yeah.
So we don't
The
know
obvious
if that
concern
trend's
for
gonna
me
continue.
would be this: is imagine a world where the best EU team actually did turn out to be Fnatic. Fnatic plays with the fucking bot lane. That's their whole team identity's been about the whole split, pretty much.
It's actually really fun to watch them, by the way. Like it's really.
Oh, they're a
fun to
mega
watch.
team, of course.
They're,
Yeah, but
they're complete psychopaths in the bot lane. I've never seen something like that. Like, oh my god! When I remember that one scene when I think it was one of the support was recalling. I mean, there's the bot lane bush, right? Like as you go to lane, and you have like the 2 barriers, and you have like the bot lane bush and the golems. Like one was basically recalling above the bush, like looking for Hylissang and Upset, and the other one was recalling below the bush, basically hiding in turret. And both of them got run down from the enemy turret to their own turret and still got cancelled like 20 seconds, 30 seconds later because they were so afraid of already recalling in lane and still got chased down and both got cancelled and suddenly lost all tempo on the map and the game was over. Like through that one play. It's as dumb as it sounds. It's when I watch Fnatic play, it's the only team that I can see make something greater happen than they actually are right now. Like, and I think that's kind of weird to say about a Yamato Ken team because I've always thought of him as a non-innovator, but rather someone that's really good at utilizing the meta to his advantage and really making like his team safe and sound. And then they're pretty good within that patch. But whatever Hylissang and Upset are doing is quite frankly something that no one in the world does. And it's this recall canceling into tempo control.
You see
into
that. A good example of this, by the way, is in game 2 of this series. Even when Hylissang like hooks into the turret and dies on Nautilus and like ints the lane, basically, when he recalls, he actually when he revives, rather, when he comes back to life and he walks in the lane, he actually like cancels Flackett's recall like when he comes back, and it's like, you know, he does things even from disadvantageous situations that are really interesting to watch. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And you know, he had a bad game in game 2, which is, you know, certainly a huge factor in the loss that they had in that game. But the rest of the series, he was great.
On point.
Yeah. I even think the aspect that's a bit underrated about that bot lane, by the way, is historically, like, look, when they had Reckless and Hylissang, that was a very good bot lane too. But the difference is, even though stylistically in the modern day, actually Upset and Reckless have some decent stylistic comparisons, like they are way more aligned than back in the day when people used to try and force like the Upset forgiving comparison, which I don't think is applicable in the modern day if you look how they play. But the difference is this: if people don't know, behind the scenes, actually Hylissang and Reckless had very different philosophy on the game, and it's more almost like they just had an interesting creative tension as to how they played in the game. Upset and Hylissang, for real, look like they are on completely the exact same page for the whole time I've seen them play together now. Like they look like they know exactly what they're doing. I mean, not entirely, because obviously Hylissang's not consciously knowing the fucking plays he's going for, but they have total buy-in from that lane. So I agree, like the pairing is incredible. Now, our question is just like I said, if the meta is how it is right now, essentially the best EU team is going to be playing maybe from the wrong side of the map.
I mean, it could also be I mean, a winner can adapt, but maybe the meta within EU is actually the way that it is because of how top-down the EU structure usually is. It's EU sometimes adapts, but they don't necessarily. The bottom two teams oftentimes copy the top two teams, and it happens in every region, obviously. And at some point, you must have had that adaptation towards Fnatic, who has consistently been, to my estimation, the best team in EU besides like Rogue for quite for a short stretch. But Upset and Hillsong have definitely been the best bot lane. If you didn't match them in the early game, if you weren't able to do anything against them, you had to. You literally forfeited the game to a certain extent. And I think that may be something that has been driving the evolution within EU to actually be more bot lane centric. So it may not just be that EU is how to put this, that they're bad at top lane, is that they consciously are really good at bot lanes and really bot lane centric play. Maybe that's something. I mean, it sounds like a lot of hopium copium, but to me that is something that could actually be a fact within the play styles that have evolved, because Fnatic still, I mean, even at this point, when I watch them play, I think they would be a threat to a lot of teams. I just don't think that the overall region of EU is as good as it should be, because the other teams simply, quite frankly, besides maybe Rogue, they suck. Like G2 sucks, Misfits sucks, Vitality sucks.
There are glaring flaws to all of these teams. Like there are really big holes.
I thought I was eloquent enough.
Well, I think that they suck in different ways, right? But I think you could say the same thing about LCS. Even Cloud9's drafts right now are looking a little bit suspect, and like, you know, Team Liquid has had some giga throws from really big advantages because of terrible macro plays.
That's just the Buipo factor once in a while.
That's true. It's true. It is harder to believe that TL will like suffer in a best of 5 from that, because throwing a game isn't going to be the end of the world. And especially,
to be fair though, I also think another factor is like ADC pool in LEC is pretty fucking good right now. And that's a pretty strong position, even though historically it was. I mean, if people don't know, the original League of Legends regions back in the day, that was supposed to be the weakest position from Europe, because we never had, like, until Forgiven, the like hard carry ADCs. We always had the more support of like the Yellow Peats of the world, didn't we? That was more our sort of fucking Gen.G was our top guy for fucks. In his mind, he was. It was more like the role was a carry at the time. That's all you need to know exactly. I think late game Cogmore was a carry, not necessarily Yellow Peak. That would be my way of explaining it. You know, he was talented though. No, because I think that's the case totally. Whereas meanwhile, like, I even made this point on Twitter, but I don't think people get it. Like, if you want to tie back into that topic earlier about, like, you know, essentially don't throw away something that was very valuable previously, but maybe he's having like a period where it's not valued as highly for the rookie every time. Here's a factor that I would immediately say out right now. So obviously the amazing G2 lineup from 2019 and 2020, spoiler, except for one team, they're all just spread out across the bloody remaining LEC teams. It's like they just split up Exodia, and that just is all the other teams. Like, that just shows why this is why, to me, you know, in the offseason, some people were like, I wonder if anyone will sign Wunder or Mickey. It's like, no one's going to gamble on them. What, nobody? Like, dude, if I'm the third or fourth best team, I'm going straight for that guy, because all I'm gambling is he has his turnaround season. This is his comeback season. By the way, it's already worked out like a motherfucker for XL. They were almost made it past this series. That probably wouldn't happen.
They should have won that series.
They should have won it. And one of the main factors they were even in this series was because Mickey X played really fucking well and carried some of these games.
Yeah. Because that was, to me, the potential game changers. Like, that's like, it's not really found money because you had to pay for him, but to get Mickey X partway through a split, like, I'd like to have someone like that walking through the bloody door when things are going bad.
That actually gets me back to the point that, like, of the veterans versus rookies, right? It's not necessarily even about that, but it's also that some players that are like some veterans have this X factor in them. They have this X factor, and I think Mickey X he could be really fucking bad at the game right now. Like, he could literally not be able to lane. He would still be able to read the map correctly at certain times and make that one or two play set where he simply wins the game for you. And I think that's something that is so undervalued that I don't say clutch factor, but that's what it is, where they read the map on a higher level than most other players do, where the other players are simply operating on this lane status. They're like, okay, we're just going to go lane. We're going to get 10 CS advantage, 15 CS advantage. We're going to win the game. But it's like this make or break kind of play where they analyze the map correctly and do something about it. And that is something that is so undervalued and not omnipresent with a lot of teams. And which is why, like, someone like Wunder, someone like Mickey X, and even someone like, I mean, I suppose even Caps, despite his performance recently, is still a player to be, or still players to be feared because of that very ability to make something happen within the moment that actually couldn't win the game. So I don't know, like, but to come back on that Vitality Xayah thing, I am still so dumbfounded by how Xayah lost, but I'm also very dumbfounded by how awful I perceive Vitality to be. Like, that is something that
Vitality's only good game in this series was game 5, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And think about it, that would you would even be primed for it then, because that's when all those bloody rookies like Marcoon, that's when their arsehole becomes so tight you can fit a grain of rice through it. Like, yeah, of course that guy is going to be amazing in the first 3 games. Then, like, what do you expect? Like, the joke there is Vitality didn't even win. XL just fucking gave up. There you go. You like that?
Game two seemed like it. Yeah, it was a weird series.
It was really weird. And game 2, by the way, I'd love to get your take on this. Amazing. I am unsure if Vitality doesn't like get Cloud Soul, I don't know if they win this game. Because if it's not Cloud Soul, which is obviously incredible on Olaf, I don't know if they could win, because a lot of this was self-made, just like being able to sprint into the back line with Cloud Soul. So I think that they got big lucky in terms of the RNG.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you had like Inferno Soul or whatever, it may have been something similarly, but it was very important. For the weirdest part about it though was just the fact that they even got to play that game. That is really weird. If you lose early the way that you do with Olaf, if I remember correctly, it was like they lost the early game. They were down by like 4K, if I remember correctly, and the game should just end. But again, we have this comeback mechanic, plus honestly just some inexperience.
Finn's inability to press R was a huge factor. Misplays were made.
Yeah, I looked it up right now. So like 17
I need to rewatch it too.
They're down by something like 4 or 5k gold, a few towers. They've split a Drake each. Like, yeah, in this scenario, like Vitality was like in a pretty decent spot early on in that game, it looks like.
Oh yeah, let's quickly. Yeah, the way that Xayah played too was kind of reminiscent of like the old, I suppose, even Fnatic teams that Gamba coached. You know what I mean by that? Like the Rockstar teams, not the non-Rockstar, the better ones, I would say. But because they kept making plays, but it was like on the kind of like rogue-centric timer where they saw something and were like level 3, level 4, level 5. We have these operational plays. We're gonna make this happen, and they worked like clockwork. And at some point, for some reason, they just decided not to do that anymore, and they made plays and forced plays that were completely, I don't say anesthetic, but that's kind of what I felt when I watched the game. Because they made plays that were uncharacteristic for the comp that they played, because they played a really, I mean, they quite frankly played a scaling comp, which you could argue outscales the enemy or not, but I do believe that they should have. If you just played clean down, and they didn't. At some point, they became hyper focused on just making plays. Especially on the side lanes, when you have Victor, when you have Zillion Jinx still scaling, you have Volibear engage. There are 2 options you can have. You can either have both side lanes rotate to mid lane, can have the pinch maneuver, or you literally just overload on the side lane at some point because you have the Ryze that is going to have prio, or the Trainer that is going to have prio, and then you literally just like have him reset, go on the side lane together, you play 3-2, and then you make a play on the Nard that is very vulnerable, or the Victor is very vulnerable. So for me, it was really evident that they had some kind of lack of experience around playing silence, which would at least make sense if you have a rookie jungler and a like Finn as a top laner, because Finn is not necessarily the guy that I would say is this side laner himself. He's more of a group first kind of person. So I don't know, like I wish Xayah would have won it.
This game 2 comp is like great for 1-3-1, right? It's insane. Like, you should be able to get an advantage with tower dives early between Volibear and Tryndamere. Like, you should be able to dive turrets because you have 2 forms of being invulnerable to the turrets, right? And frankly, like, Finn fucked that up. There's no other way to say it. and then in the late game, like, you should have a Ryze and Tryndamere in the side lanes, and then you have a Zillion Jinx Volibear, where if they allocate, because it should take multiple people to stop the Tryndamere. If you see them doing that, then you just dive under the turret with Volibear and Zillion ult, or you just take the tower, right? And it's a good composition. It's a good composition, and you can team fight with it if you need to as well. Like ideally, you want a 1-4 split and have the Tryndamere not there or cleaning up, but you have the power of the late game Zilean. You have hyper carries on this team. It's not a bad comp, and they just failed to execute it pretty spectacularly.
Yeah, I mean the R is pretty hard to press. Yeah, that's just happens. As I just rewatched it, he was chasing down the Gnar and gets boomeranged in his face and didn't react. So that happens, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I wish Xayah would have won, quite frankly, for my own sake, because
Yeah, me too.
I do believe that Vitality didn't. I mean, I mean, I don't think that Selfmade at this point in time is a good jungler in my book. Like I can't. I thought about it for a long time because I do respect his efforts, especially when he's on Fnatic. But then I rewatched and rethought about his time in XK. Then I rethought about his ongoing time in Vitality now. And to me, there are too many stars that have to line for him to be a carry. And it's mostly centered around like his AFK farming style would work out. He's kind of like a professional version of Melis at this point, which is, to my estimation, I mean, more professional version, I guess. That is, to my estimation, not necessarily the playstyle that you want to run if you have to make plays for your team and if you have to execute something, because they all of them, Selfmade, Alfari, Perks, and their bot lane, they all exist in isolation. It's not like they have any kind of cohesion where I'm like, this is their playstyle. There is no playstyle. It's simply AFK farming on every single role, hoping that something works out. And if it does, they look good because they win mid to late game team fights. If it doesn't work out, they suddenly find themselves in a 3K hole or 4K hole, and then they don't quite know what to do besides team fighting. And then it's again the same issue, right? So for me, it is shameful that Vitality, with their performance, was able to get to the next level because they I would bet that every other team, even Misfits, would have probably beaten them in that very best of 5. Like I think Xayah was the only one that could lose this with the way that they played. Like individual errors, but more or less simply that they were too focused on like they have to get too far ahead to win against good teams, which is what Xayah's issue has been throughout the split, in my opinion.
Our problem is this, and you might know this analogy. This reminds me of back in the day, early fucking Clearlove Monty. Do you remember those arguments, those fucking wars on talk shows, where obviously all the LPL people thought he was really good, and then you were obviously always like, well, he's not, is he? Look at like the Korean junglers, they gank all the time. This motherfucker just AFK farms, right? The way I used to try and describe it was this. I actually used to say to the LPL people, look, if we're being straight up, if you look at what a jungler is required to do, he is a bad jungler. Like he's not doing that shit. Like you can't build your team around him normally. But I acknowledge, if you ignore the roles, he's sort of a good player in his own very unique way. That's what Selfmade is to me at this point. Like if I actually ask what is a jungler required to do right now,
oh yeah,
he's not very good at it. Like he's nowhere near the best jungler in the LEC. But in terms of like a skilled player, he's a very skilled player. So you see, if he gets the right champion and the right game, of course he'll have a game where he'll get 10 kills. He'll do it. The problem is, game to game, what I want from a jungler, I have a hard time building a team around this guy.
I think the biggest problem, if I were to sum up Selfmade, he's a good team fighter. And he understands who to target and how to play around a composition in the mid and late game. The biggest problem with Vitality is they lack any kind of team cohesion around wave states or how to. They have no set plays. It feels like they don't understand how to play around their laning phase in the early game or how to apply pressure based on map state. That's what it feels like to me. And I think you can see this because the one time they did this was in the final game of the series, where I think Selfmade played properly for the first time that I've seen in a long time, where he recognized that Patrick and Mickey on the Caitlyn Lux combo, which, by the way, I have no idea why XL wanted to do this when Jinx was open and Jinx was working for the rest of the series. That's like very weird. I think a lot of it was they wanted Mickey to carry on the Lux, which he has done in previous games, and he can provide this damage. But when they saw that they were going to be playing this very aggressive lane early on and that they wanted to push and take plates, what ended up happening was Selfmade helps out Alfari in top lane early on to get the early advantage into the Mordekaiser. Huge advantage to the Camille at that point in time. And then he spends the rest of the time literally in the XL's bot side jungle so that Caitlyn and Lux can't pressure and get any kind of advantage, and then they get outscaled by the Aphelios. To me, this is playing around win conditions, and also Perks was shoving in mid lane with the Orianna. I saw Selfmade doing what a good jungler should do in that scenario, and he played it really well. But I don't see that a lot of the time. Like so many times this season, I see like a wave about to crash, and then Selfmade's just not there, and then Alphari dies to a dive, or they're really not set up very well in terms of reading the map a minute or two in advance, and then they rely as a crutch on the team's ability to team fight or kind of individual skill later in the game. So I guess the answer is, I guess I was encouraged by Vitality Game 5 because it finally looked like they had gotten their shit together. But that's just one game. So,
but I'm just trying to fathom like as to how that happens, right? Like when you have, I mean, Rich obviously has had a different approach to Carzzy than I have. I still think that Carzzy was pretty good last year. I still think that was pretty active. I was kind of unsure about Labrov, but the overall team makeup should incentivize aggression. It should incentivize aggression, right? Like you have Perks, who's relatively aggressive. He wants to make plays. Selfmade usually want to make plays. The only passive players that I can see on this roster are more like Alphari, who's kind of the Odo Amna kind of train of lane focused and then trying to make some plays with the team, but it's not necessarily like in his best interest. And vice versa, Labrov, who's, I mean, I still don't have a proper read on this guy. I don't know if he's good or bad. Like I'm perfectly honest, but I don't see him as someone that is going to be the playmaker similar to Hillsang is, or even Trimby to a certain extent is, right? He's not on the same level of game expertise, but which forces him to be passive. But overall, the direction of the team should be more aggressive. Yet they, as you said, like no set plays, but it's also that they don't understand the innate advantages of the champions to begin with. And that is more concerning to me because that is a game knowledge problem that is probably due to either bad coaching or low motivation, whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but it seems to be pointing in that direction where, like, if you have Olaf, for example, or you have like whatever it is, or you have more advantage, like engaged advantages, whatever it is, it's really clear what you have to do. It's really clear cut. And it took them 4 to 5 games to actually even understand the very patterns in which case Excel was operating. And it just seemed by sheer luck that they at some point figured out, like, oh, we have to do this. And that is much more concerning to me than anything else that I've seen from them. Which I don't know, like I don't know where to go from here. But it's like the 3rd or 4th time that I see this with Alphari teams, where he is obviously good enough. He's really good as a player, but yet his teams seem really low in terms of the set play systems instead of the operation, like the level of operation that they're on. They don't seem to be cohesive, nor do they seem to understand how to play the game. And it seems to be that Alphari, like despite his individual greatness, also has to bring something more to the team. Like it is concerning to me that this happens like 4 to 5 times. Same with Selfmade now, like it's the 2nd time now. And with Perks, I guess with Cloud9, he had the similar issue that all these players kind of don't have functional teams in some senses that they've been working on recently, at least.
For me, one factor that is never considered, though, and this is the smoke screen, because of the players on paper, we never usually get off bloody paper. The whole discussion's like super team. Is it a super team? They're a super team. By the way, spoiler, it is. A super team is defined before the lineup plays. It doesn't matter if they turn out to sock later. And yes, obviously that guy who's like a coach of Vitality trying to be like, why are they calling it a super team when your own brand was entirely like, we just signed the biggest roster of all time, motherfucker. Like, you did that. It's just some sort of schizophrenic episode. Have a conversation with yourself, mate.
Let's go through the players and ask ourselves, is this a super team? Okay, Perks, greatest Western player of all time. Alphari, been the best top laner in Europe, even on bad teams. Super hyped coming into Team Liquid.
Aussie champion.
Self-made, super hyped jungler on consistently top teams. Carzzy, back-to-back champion in the LEC. Like, Labrov is really the only one who you're like, well, that guy may not be the greatest, right? But there was a huge expectation on this
some mechanical beast. Yeah, of course. So anyway, the point I was going to make was this. Because we're all obsessed with the players, and we keep saying, why are the players not working? Here's the question for you all. Who's their coach? I bet half the people in chat couldn't even tell you who their coach is. There's an obvious question I would have. If I was going to spend millions and millions on a project,
I mean, Perks is the answer, right?
I might just go ahead and break the bank and get a famous coach as well, because I have to have someone to actually do something with those pieces. Like, you can't just make an NFL team and have no coach. So the problem I have is I just don't know their coach. It's someone who I've looked it up. He's apparently an assistant coach on Fnatic 3 years ago, and he was an assistant coach of Vitality beforehand.
I mean, to be fair, Faker is the coach of T1 right now, and that's working. You know, and Perks and Alfari should be the coaches of this team if we're being real.
To me, that's the bigger issue. Is if I bring in all these pieces, either yes, for real, the players are going to coach the team and they know what they're doing, or I'm bringing in like a big name person to be the coach. I'm bringing in like a bigger figure to put his stamp on the game. That's the one area they don't have anything.
Look, I think the biggest problem here is that nobody is actually dictating what should be done in the game state. Like, it feels like Selfmade isn't doing it. Labrov definitely isn't doing it because Labrov is in the wrong place all the time on this team. And so they're not able, like, it's either Alfari and Perks are not able to relay that information based on their lanes, or they're expecting Selfmade and Labrov to run the shot calling, and it's not happening. That's what it feels like to me. And I think if you don't, in the current meta, if you don't have a jungler or support who is basically pulling the strings in the early game and collecting the necessary information from the laner about wave states and matchups, you're going to fall behind. And if you look at,
they're also a team that has zero connection between jungle and support.
I mean, there's a reason.
There's no connection there at all.
There's a reason KIA won MVP of the LCK. Not only because he's a great individual player, but because he is constantly in the right place at the right time. It's clear that he is the one leading the shot calling of this roster. He is the one engaging for this team. He is bailing people out like a motherfucker. Like, if you think this T1 team would be good without KIA, like, he is fucking saving his dumbass teammates all the time. Like, Gumayushi looks a billion times better because KIA is on this roster. And it's not that Guma is a bad player, guys. It's that Guma is a young player and he positions questionably at times. And if KIA is not there to just eat him up as Tom Kench, this looks like it would be very different. It would be very different. Like, people underestimate how much KIA does. He is an extraordinary player at the moment and a huge part of T1 success. But it's very clear that the pressure happens around Owner and KIA and them relaying the information about where people can be at certain points in the game and where they are at certain points in the game in terms of macro. And it's just a hot mess from Vitality outside of that fifth game. I was actually really encouraged to see that fifth game because it felt like they actually finally had good comms and a good read on the situation and were able to snowball it.
You can get away with more dumb game states, and you can get away with being dumber at the game if you literally also pick dumber, I guess. What I mean by that is that there's a mismatch between their current ability and the champions that they pick. They pick as if they knew how to snowball, but they don't. So why do you do that? Just pick, the LS meme is quite alive in that regard. I don't always agree with them on everything, but if you're just trying to be smart about the picks and you try to really find niches, in which case your outscaling mechanisms work and they are hidden, quite frankly, and really hard, you can actually get away with being slightly dumb at the game, being good at team fighting. But that is also something that Vitality is not doing. And actually, it's something that G2 is also not doing. It's kind of like G2 and Vitality have kind of similar issues in a way, in terms of the macro scale, in terms of the teams. But maybe they go part individually how they go about things. Like Junkers, for example, overhelping instead of like AFK farming. But both teams have a mismatch between how good they think they are at certain champions and how good they actually are. And that execution really seems to be an issue for both teams. Where, to now, I guess maybe advance if you guys want to do to G2. But it's like when I saw G2, I saw a team almost trying to catch their prior success within a series, and it was really sad to see. And what I mean by that is, like, usually when you have like Lee Sin, like the Junkers Lee Sin, you have this guy who's quick hit, level 3, level 4, war jump, Q, first blood, second blood, whatever. It's like, he snowballs out of control, right? Or he makes the team snowball out of control. He played the exact same way as he always did, but the execution was just 10 times worse. And like, his positioning was the same. He tried to position in helping mechanisms around especially caps, and every single time he tried to do anything that would have resembled a kind of advantage, he was literally just off in the execution, and he was maybe even slightly off in the positioning. But his mind was like in the 2019, but his body was like in 2022. So that was one of the saddest things to see in a long while, where I felt I felt sad watching actually. I felt really sad watching G2 against Fnatic. It was really sad. I know you guys felt, but that was my kind of my
I've got a little segue, a little question for you.
I don't disagree.
This is exactly where it's funny. The timing on this is perfect because something like a week ago, I actually made this video. The video was called on my channel "Fine Isn't Good Enough," and it's exactly for this scenario. Because after that series, G2 against Fnatic, all I did is I tweeted one thing. I just said, "What happened to Caps?" And I had loads of people, like Gilius's reply basically was exactly what I was trying to address with this video. Because Gilius replied and said, "Played a good series today." So he was trying to sort of push back. But here's my problem. Yeah, you're right, Gilius. For you and your teams, that was good. That was fine.
Oh my
No,
God.
this is real. For him, that would be a good mid laner. That ain't good enough for Caps. That isn't good enough for G2. G2's a team that could have signed fucking Viper as their AD carry. They could have signed the best player in the world at AD carry. They could have signed, that means Chovy as mid laner. They could go for the best players in the world. If you have Caps, that's my point. If you're on if you're on Gilius's team, you're a team that's borderline playoffs. So for you, LEC quality is what you're looking for. G2's looking for the best player in Europe. They're looking for the best mid laner in Europe. They're looking for someone who in a series like this will just take over and win the game for you and have like a pop-off game that gets you to a game 5 where suddenly everything's possible. That wasn't what Caps did here. If you took the nameplate off, you wouldn't know this was Caps. Like, he's a good player, yeah. He even had some all right games in this series. He wasn't bad, but he wasn't fucking Caps, and that's my problem, because G2 has essentially built their squad around having gold Caps.
And you can tell
another capital letter. I think that's what he has to do.
Yeah, get rid of the capital P. But I mean, you can tell that even G2 doesn't have the confidence in him, right? They're picking the Lysandra into the LeBlanc matchup.
He became the meme himself.
Karma.
He's back to Lysandra. He's literally become the meme.
He's back to Lysandra. He's back to Karma. Yeah. He's basically Faker from Worlds last year when it comes to the way that you want to pick the counter pick, or you want to pick that matchup so that you can have a utility or maybe a roam, and you're playing a more utilitarian mid lane role. But there are certain caveats you have to hit. And yes, I think G2, they want to play through top lane. That's very clear. Broken Blade wants to be the carry. Broken Blade is capable of carrying. But the way that teams work in this meta, if you do that, right? If you are going to play this style, if you are going to Bjergsen it, or to a degree Faker it right now, even though Faker, I would say, plays more carry champs, right? You have to have two side lanes capable of carrying. You're going to put that trust. Like, if we're being honest, G2, it's playoffs. Is Flakked the guy you want to carry your team instead of Caps? Is that realistic? Is that the right way to play this game right now? It's the right way to play the meta, okay? But is it the right way for G2 to win a playoff best of 5? And the answer to that, I think, is no, it's not. And even in the game they won, it took incredible ints from Fnatic in order to pull that off. And, Hylissang sometimes has these games where he's just going to keep trying and making plays. And if you shut it down, it looks real bad. It looks real bad. But also, game 1 of Fnatic, they played they played a T1 comp, basically. Like, this is a comp that T1 would play. Again, it has the hallmarks of, like, the poke from Jason LeBlanc, and then you got the hyper carry and the Zeri, and then you have the scaling, or you have the resets coming in from the Viego, right? You have a level of engage with this composition too with Renata Glask. I'm not sure T1 would pick this because it is harder to engage with this composition than many of their other comps. But regardless, like, it had the whiff of T1. It was executed very well by Fnatic, and G2 was really disappointing. You can tell that they're trying to take flyers because they're playing Yone in the top lane, and even though that is a Broken Blade champ, not exactly the most meta pick in the universe.
Pretty wild for a game 1 opening draft. Like that, unfortunately, Monty, when I see that draft there, that actually makes me think G2 knew they were the underdog, and that they really do think Fnatic's way better than them. Why do you start with that draft for game 1?
I think look, if you're going to take risks, a lot of the time game 1 is the time to do that, because you can just say, oh, it didn't work, now we're going to go back to normal. And if it does work, then you introduce a lot of weird things into the draft from that point forward, where they're like, oh, do we have to ban the Yone, or like now we lost to it. So I actually do think it's not terrible to do that kind of strategy, because you're also not giga tilting your players by putting them into like an 0-2 hole by doing that, and like forcing them to reverse sweep, and then they feel bad because they took the risk with this champion. So I think game 1's the time to do it if you're going to do it. I don't necessarily blame them, but also I think that it's clear that the team doesn't have confidence in Caps from the way that they're drafting and the way that they're playing. And to me, that's the biggest disappointment coming into
It's the question is also like, I mean, to me, is Fnatic's playstyle also just really, really fucking good? And are they actually just ahead of the teams to that extent that it wouldn't have mattered whatever Caps picked? Because I'm almost inclined to believe that to a certain extent. Because when I watched Fnatic, it seemed to me that they knew what G2 was doing. Even like they were kind of like how SKT is ahead, or T1, not SKT, but T1 is ahead compared to other teams in the LCK. It felt the same way with Fnatic compared to G2. And I don't want to say like they're on the same level, but it's just like the comparable level to the other teams in the LEC seems to be that way, where it didn't actually matter what G2 was trying to do because it was already on the back foot. Especially Junkers was Lee Sin, I suppose, and then Caps obviously in laning phase 2. That you knew exactly what it was going to do. There was only a limited amount of range you could, like of actions you could take, and they were all covered. And that is something that I've like usually don't see this with Caps, right? And that's kind of what you guys are alluding to. That his play is kind of fading, but it's that usually all of his things weren't covered. So he had like one or two options he was trying to figure out, and he was able to figure out, but there was nothing there. And I don't even know if a champion would have fixed it. I think it is literally, I don't know. It just it feels that he just gotten old. As dumb as it sounds, he's just gotten old, and he plays old. He plays old. He doesn't play like a young man, and that.
All right, I mean, you fight like a young man, Caps.
Look, if Faker can have a resurgence, you can too, Caps. Exactly. I believe in you.
Victory has defeated you at MSI. You're on Lysandra now, boy. All right.
But it is like the.
Maybe this is just Caps' laundry cycle where he gets washed temporarily, but he comes out all shiny and new again. I mean, Faker's has had several trips to the laundry at this point in time, and he comes back.
Bro, if anything, in this scenario, surely it's Caps that's Bruce Wayne because fucking Humanoid's Bane. He's like, we now have access to your old champion pool, Caps. We will make use of it. Thank you. Like, fucking, you think it was Caps playing the Humanoid side of these matchups? What? LeBlanc every game, yes, please.
Yeah.
Like, the joke now is Caps really does play some like boomer fucking mage champion pool. Look at it. His go-to picks for real are Orianna and Rise, for fuck's sake. Like his idea of getting crazy is he picks Karma. You know, in the meta right now, have you not seen Vethio? You can play fucking Akali, Zoe, Syndra, like fucking LeBlanc. You can just style on motherfuckers all day long. He's not even trying. What is this shit? And you know what? Everyone who flamed me the last 2 years for liking Larson, it's just boring watching play Orianna. I'd rather watch fucking Larson play Orianna than Caps, mate. Larson's a fucking monster on Orianna. What are you talking about? Larson's fucking Victor smashes games. He looks like a fucking one of the best players in West on that shit. What's Caps amazing on? What's he sick on right now? Exactly. You're struggling to fucking.
I think you could. I think you could also like evaluate mid laners right now. I think the ultimate test of mid laners in the current meta is the Ahri test, where either you are completely fucking useless on it because you're not going to build a lot of necessary damage on Ahri. But if you watch Faker play Rookie play Ahri right now, holy shit! I mean, I watched Faker's Ahri in that Kwangdong series, and it was fucking incredible. I mean, Korea would basically just eat him on Tom Kedge, engage with him, and then he would just fly over a million walls and kill everybody and just get into the backline and fuck shit up. It was awesome to watch. Rookie has been incredible on Ahri towards the end of the LPL season. And then you see all these people, you know, in LPL and LCK, but also in other regions, like try and pick up the Ahri, and it's just the most boring shit you've ever seen, doing zero damage.
Control mage at that point. Like
yeah, it does.
It actually is. Oh, man.
Yeah, I mean, so the Ahri test is really like the current test of mid laners, where it's either the most like Pog champ or the most boring champ you've ever seen. And it all depends on how you play it and how your team plays around it and how you shouldn't die, because then it ruins all your like Dark Seal stacks and then you turn into a useless piece of shit.
Oh my god.
It's true though.
Is there any other player or team that we didn't shit talk today? Is there anything?
Look, I think Fnatic. I think people are going to want to hear us say nice things about Fnatic, and I think they deserve them. I think that, again, going back to the T1 comp, that's a tough to execute composition that they executed really well in game number 1, and that's an encouraging sign, I would say, for the West in general, because we talked earlier about how hard T1's comps are to play well with. And when they do play well with them, they seem oppressive, but people don't really understand that they're walking on the knife's edge there and that it could go badly at any point in time. And indeed, that's how T1 has lost games. It's not like they won every single game they played. They just won every best of 3. Because as long as you're consistently good with it, you can pull out in a series, right? I think Humanoid certainly looks a lot better as the split has gone on, even though it looked rough. Resork, the same thing. It's nice to see Wonder on champs like Camille, that he has been historically very good on again. Upset and Hylissang have obviously been good the entire split, and Hylissang, you know, probably in the MVP conversation, you'd have to imagine with VTO. Probably not going to get it compared to VTO, but certainly probably you'd say the runner-up potentially in MVP contention for LEC.
So it's great though. The next 2 matchups in their own totally different context are amazing because you have the 2 best teams, Fnatic versus Rogue. Spoiler, there's a million great narratives there. They're not only the 2 best teams from the whole split, they're also the teams where, because they have Larssen and Humanoid, they carry the same character of like, one was supposed to be the choker, the other one was the champion. They even, on the way over their careers, have been back and forth the last few years. So there's potentially the marquee match, and obviously we're expecting maybe the final preview because it's the upper bracket. And then in the lower bracket, G2 versus Vitality is not only another great matchup, Perks versus Caps, but it's also literally 2 teams that both look so fucking messy right now. And that one, the difference is, I expect Rogue versus Fnatic will actually tell me, is the LEC really good? If that's an epic series, awesome. The bottom series is just like, who wants to stay in the playoffs? It's going to be an absolute, like, that's going to be like fucking rats crawling across each other. They get onto a fucking ship that's sinking gradually, but they're going off a fucking another ship. Like, that's going to be a nightmare, that game. That's going to be one of the worst games of League of Legends ever played. Get ready. Get ready for an absolute fiesta in that one. I'm guaranteeing it right now. Not least also because, by the way, I know this. When former teammates like Perks and Caps play against each other, you just int way harder because you just want to kill that guy so much more in the team fight. Everyone knows it. It's a real factor, isn't it? Like, you just go that much harder. Like, you extend even more for that motherfucker. Of course. Of course.
I mean, but just imagine you'd have that matchup again, like in 20, like just compared to the potential 2019 matchup that you had, or 2018, I guess even, like when they actually faced against one another. And then you got robbed of 2 years of it because they played on the same team. And then the one guy went to NA, the other one stayed, and now you have this in a depressing kind of way. It's like the Mad World version of it. It's just, I don't know. Like when I watch when I think about it, it's just not good. It's just not good.
Here's my little mini rant.
I actually don't want to see it. I don't want to see it.
I've got a mini rant for you, because here's what you need to know, ladies and gentlemen, is there's a difference, right, between strategy and tactics. It's often actually a point lost on people. They think it's the same term, and in the modern day, sadly, colloquially, people do use the terms interchangeably. But in theory, the premise is supposed to be this. Strategy is more like the concept of macro. It's like the large, overarching things you're doing to achieve a total goal. Like, for example, your strategy might be we play very quickly and, like, decisively. That's like our strategy. Tactics are the specific set players that you're using to implement your strategy into the game. Right? Here's the cool thing about Perks. Everyone else who plays League of Legends plays this game now to try and win this game now, to win the next. They all do it like dated. This guy, he sees the game. He really is playing chess. Think how next level this motherfucker is. So remember in 2018, he was in a tough spot, wasn't he? Because he was clearly the second best mid laner. But he was in an era where Fnatic had a slightly better team and they had Caps, and he was just not only the best, but he was like, everyone knows he was already preternaturally good. He was just better than the whole region and he stood out. So if you're Perks at that point in time, listen, it was great you have your 4 titles, but you're going to bleed titles for years now. Like this guy, unfortunately, as you get a way better team than him, he's going to take the titles and your 4 is suddenly going to be 4-1, 4-2. And if it had kept going, remember it was 4-2 when Caps joined up with Perks. If it was 4-2, you can see next couple of years, if Caps wins most of them, he'll be ahead of you. Perks is so next level. He didn't know this part. I'm making this part up. But what people do in League of Legends, they can't account for role swaps. Because what we all do anyways, we give everyone the championship. So we say Mickey X has 4 championships. You know what I mean? Like we say that fucking like everyone has them all, right? So here's the genius. Because what Perks did is he essentially said this, Caps, why don't you come and win titles with me? Spoiler, when you're with me, you can never overtake me. So Caps came along, they won 4 titles together. Perks is so gangster, he not only persuaded his main rival, who was about to dominate him, to play for him, win him titles. He even, for one split, said, you know what, actually, I'll take mid lane back, fuck around at ADC. Had that guy in Nightmare Prison playing Aphelios and fucking Senna, while he was going, this is fucking sick. Now there's no one to challenge me. Really did just win. Remember, Smurfed on Nemesis, played both sides of the match, won another LEC. When you know what, actually, that's rude. I did invite you in my house. You can have mid lane back. They won another split. They went to Worlds. He finished top 4. Then, when he left, right? This is genius. When he left, not only did Perk score and win an LEC title and come back, but now that he's come back, Caps has won nothing in the meantime and is semi-washed. Perks is a fucking genius. Now the title haul, if anyone's keeping track, is like fucking, isn't it something like, it's 9 if you count LCS. Even if you only go LEC, it's 8 LEC titles for Perks. And Caps is stuck on his 6, isn't he? And at this point in time, it's going to be hard to get 2 more with no one. So even though I'm obviously making this sound way better than it is, like a movie, if you look in the longest term possible, Perks is like 900 IQ compared to Europe. This guy's a fucking genius. He literally took like his own rival and made him win titles for him.
Here you go. Here's the next. Here's the end of this story. By the way, yes. Thorin. This is where G2 switches Caps to AD carry, gets rid of Flacked, and signs VTO.
Oh,
that's the way around it for sure. Yeah.
Oh man.
Basically, Caps needs to listen to this and go, oh, and then exactly. He does the same move, right? Come on, VTO, you're coming with me. Listen. I've got a conversation I need to tell you.
Into the G2 hot tub with you,
VTO. Exactly.
You want to take a swim? You want to take a swim? Oh man.
And by the way, no one's even thought of this yet, Monty. Why am I the only one who sees shit on the horizon? No one's even thought through the real reason G2 versus Vitality is amazing. Because either Carlos or fucking Perks are going to go mental when they win that series. Just wait. Whichever one of the two wins it, they are going to go off on Twitter. Get ready for that fucking... The second that last game finishes, rush to your Twitter. Because either Perks is going to say some banger line like... You know, it's going to be some shit about like the off season when he was with Carlos or whatever. Or Carlos is going to have some angle back. So I can't wait for that. Just the storylines alone, that one's fire. The actual upper bracket match is the better matchup. We should probably talk about that a bit. Rogue versus Fnatic.
I think a lot of people will side with Fnatic because the last time in the best of 1 they won this, but that was also with Rogue giving Humanoid Twisted Fate for no reason. And they kind of entered that game, both in draft and then into the game itself. So I wouldn't say that that's indicative of what's going to happen in a best of 5. I really like the way Rogue played in their semifinal. I like the way they played through top lane. I liked the fact that they were bringing back old comfort picks with like Odoamne Rumble and like reviving the kind of Jarvan Rumble ult hot pot combo that's been around for forever in League of Legends, but pops up occasionally, but it was executed really well. I think Malrang was outstanding in this series. He just plays like a maniac. And
remember, everyone said the whole split, Monty. Well, he'll be figured out in the playoffs, of course. And people even said, and what about his champion pool? Spoiler, he's not even he wasn't even playing Jarvan. He just played it like every game. And the joke is, this is why Malrang is going to be a problem if you're an LEC team. Because he doesn't actually play like he thinks he has his own role. He really thinks he just plays for the team all the time. So he doesn't give a fuck that Jarvan is a garbage champion. He just fucking dives all game long. If you're one of the players, like this is why, by the way, I've actually reversed position and I'm all in on Rogue. I really think Rogue will do it. It's because what people are forgetting is they're taking all the past Rogue playoff runs, right? Dude, you couldn't get a more different player from Inspired than Malrang. He is the polar opposite of Malrang, of Inspired. And what I love is this, is in my opinion, that is actually the easiest style to make work when things go to shit. Because you just the go button, you just press go button all the time. Inspired's trying to walk the tightrope and perfectly path the whole game. The problem with that is you're getting those, it's like the earlier discussion, you're getting fake leads, which are just CS and like half an item, but you're not actually like dominating the game. And if at any point you fall off the tightrope, you're done. Whereas you look at Malrang's style, like he just puts it on his laners. He's like, I'm going to give you your ganks, whether I'm behind or not. And then you do what you do from there on. And so you see the games like Odoamne gets up in kills. Larson has his fucking champion and you can't do anything. Like, I think it's going to be way harder than people think to stop this team. I do agree. I think Fnatic's the best squad, but I think Rogue can do it, mate.
I think Malrang's really hard to read because it feels like Malrang doesn't even know what Malrang's going to do going into a game. Like, he just plays like an insane person.
I think he's really smart. I mean, okay, so how do I explain it? I think
No, he is smart because he knows limits of his weird ass builds and like pathing that no one else knows, right? Like I don't know. He shows me shit. I'm like, I didn't know that was possible. Like I don't know if the pro players know that he was going to do that or that it was possible, or to expect him like engaging with Chem Tank and then like Zhonya's. It's like nobody expects that to fucking happen.
But
you know, in the NBA,
I also don't know why he did it.
They always say, dude, in the NBA, that when people take a bad 3-point shot, that the coach goes, no, yeah, good job. When it goes in though, because when it goes in, you can't go bad shot, right? Because it went in. So the premise with Malrang is like you just wait with like. Yeah, that was a good gag. I wondered where that was going there. Fuck, that was getting hard. But yeah, that's it. No one knows. No one can predict what this guy's going to do early game.
I mean,
he can't. He clearly doesn't. You really think he calculates it?
No, I mean, I think this first 4 to 5 levels are actually very calculated. I think he understands lane statuses very well. Like in a sense, like when lanes are pushing back, and he compared to most junglers, he actually analyzes. Which why I am always like a pretty great proponent of like really trying to figure out like how early games work, how teams are operating within the early game, which kind of like setups they have and whatever it is. Like he actually understands every setup that enemy has, and he actually punishes like even minute like problems within lane status, right? Like how often, especially Mr. Herod was caught out in that series. Like every single time he was out of position, he was dead by Malrang, right? He was basically punished. His builds, however, quite frankly, are really troll. Like there's no question about it. Like to my estimate, it's just like okay, I play a decent amount of Jarvan. I'm not saying I'm on the same level, whatever. I played in the past. This champion is not. I mean, first strike is kind of okay if you go tank because it amplifies the 10%. Like it gives you 10% more damage, gives you a bit of gold, and Conqueror doesn't really like. I mean, it skates okay, but you don't really get enough from the healing, right? If you don't have enough AD, because simply your spells do not do enough damage. So that is okay. However, if you go Zhonya's on Jarvan with only 1 AP scaling in that build, you're trolling. That is
what are you talking about? It just gives you a chance to get your EQ uptime back while you're in the middle of the fight.
Oh, man. Yeah, yeah, true. I mean, true. You could also just get more tanky. Like, what does Zhonya's gold cost? I gotta look this up. I'm actually mad now.
Zhonya's 2,600.
2,600. Okay, 2,600. And most of the tank items are around 3,200. So I guess he could get he could get like 2 Giants belts plus another ruby plus some armor. So that's kind of the equivalent of the gold value. I think I would take around 700 HP, 800 HP over the Zhonya's on a Jarvan that doesn't have any AP scaling besides the E. I think I'm good.
You could also
with
buy
that
GA.
decision.
You know?
You could also just buy GA. Yeah. But the man, I mean, I watched his stream a bit because I was really interested in how he thinks about the map.
Does he play differently in solo queue?
He plays a bit more farm heavy. Like he ignores lanes a lot more. So it seems to be like, I mean, maybe this is just like conjecture, whatever it is, but that he's really on cue with his teammates, that his teammates feed him the right amount of information. However, his mechanics actually are they're just crisp, right? He's top tier mechanically in Europe, and the man knows how to make other people play better. I think that's his best asset.
For sure.
And I think that is something that has gotten lost because of the idea that, I mean, again, you know, like the whole jungle has to farm and then get strong. The inspired kind of like play style, that is something that works in some metas. It really doesn't work in a lot of metas. It's really rare that an AFK jungle style or a more like a completely farm heavy style works. It is kind of year toss up, right? We had this in season 5 a bit. We had this season 10 a bit, and that's a long time in between, right? So Malrang's style is just more universal, and it finally shows how good Oda Amne is, because this guy, like, the people always talk about Alfari, that he's really good at laning. Obviously, Oda Amne now got the recognition, but it's the first time that I can actually see that Oda Amne, well, if he has a jungler that actually plays around him, this guy is fucking good. And all those years, whenever he was on any top tier team, the only time that he had jungler that actually even played to him to any significant degree was actually in HGK back in the days. Like, junglers was the only one that made use of it, and that was only rarely because Forgiven was like, as soon as he saw jungler pathing topside, he's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? that kind of reaction time coming in, that like I'm really surprised by him. I'm really impressed by him. I think he's really fucking good. But Malrang, underrated, by, I suppose, people that take things maybe too seriously in terms of how efficient a jungler has to be. But he may be overrated by solo queue players, I suppose, if that was a comparison where his playstyle is sometimes a bit too stupid because he could just be more efficient in his build. Like, that's what it is. It's just I don't know. Chem tank is to my also not really an item that I would defend to my death. It's okay on Jarvan. It's just they're better champions to play with Chem tank, and if you play Jarvan and you aim for the backline and you have like a significant threat, then you go Conqueror and you go God Drinker, and then you can go GA second. That's fair. You can do that.
So you want to offer a prediction?
I also think another reason Rogue match up against Fnatic well is because since they both actually for real have teams where all across the lanes they have good players, good luck banning either of these teams out. You can't ban either out. All you do is create which player you want to destroy you. But what are you taking? I assume you're taking Fnatic to win the series, Amazing.
I'm going to take Fnatic 3-2. I'm just going to do it. 3-2.
Who's the player who carries then?
I think it is going to be. I mean, it has to. I actually think that it's going to be Humanoid. I think that Larson is really, really good, but I do believe that he has some issues when he actually gets threatened in lane properly. And I think that rarely happens because most people play standard and they give him like kind of the static kind of like lane setups, right? The static lane setups where it's like, well, you're going to push out, you're going to have a jungler join you, whatever it is, and then level 4 crash back, or wave 7, whatever it is, and I'm going to get a recall in and walk back to lane. Humanoid doesn't give these lane statuses to Larson. That's very different to most other mid laners. So he doesn't have the same freedom as he has against Caps. So I think it's going to be Humanoid. It has to be Humanoid, honestly. Can't be anyone else.
Who are you taking, Monty?
I think it's going to be Rogue. I think that G2 blue side is a pretty big advantage, I would say, right now in the current state of things in draft. And I think that G2 really poorly utilized their blue side draft. Like, they were banning TF on blue side, they were banning Xayah on blue side. Like, I think they had some pretty clear holes in terms of their champion pool at the most competitive level. They also kept Caitlyn bans up the whole series. Not a lot of other regions are even playing Caitlyn right now on this patch. Like, it's falling through the holes pretty quickly because it's very predictable in the laning phase, and if you don't get an early advantage, she's significantly more useless than a lot of other hyper carries in the late game. And there are other champions that have greater survivability, like Xayah in the late game too, if you're going to be pressing up, or MF if you're playing a lane bully. These champs are also better into a lot of the pick comps that are being used right now. So I think that we are going to see a Rogue win because I think they will utilize power picks on the blue side better, and they'll be able to kind of pinch the pool and play strategically better around Fnatic.
Here's my angle. The area where I actually think people really haven't thought this one through is this. I think there's actually a position where Rogue has an edge over Fnatic. It is jungle. They still have not got Razork to the level he was last year. It's just it hasn't mattered.
He's been better,
the team is so strong overall, and everything's starting to come online. So, for example, now Wunder has the odd game that's pretty good. Obviously, Humanoid leveled up loads, and the bot lane was already really good. But I feel like Razork's sort of low-key, being a lot of empty calories this split, and he's just sort of coasted on the fact that he almost hasn't been needed to do that much. So, and also, I don't think he got his champion pool together till the end of the split, personally. So, on the other hand, I think Malrang's, you've seen it, it's just worked all split long. So here's the thing, I'll give it to Fnatic. They have some very good players, but I think across the map, I actually think the Rogue players can match them. Even the whole Hylissang angle, like everyone, like as you say, he's an MVP candidate. Mate, Trimby's been very good this split. I don't know how he's going to do in the playoffs, obviously. I'll have to see. So I'll take Rogue as well. I'll take Rogue to win 3-1. There you go. I won't say Larson carries the series. I think Humanoid's very good. I think Rogue wins 3-1.
There's also two jokes here about the Razor cake. First off, which is obviously that they could eat the Razork cake in this game.
There you go.
The second one is that the Razor cake, the way it works is by maximum edging, right? So Rogue needs to win this, so you get a taste of the cake that doesn't have the Razor in it, and then they lose the finals. That's the ultimate Razor cake play.
Yes.
I thought it was going to go a lot more darker than that.
Well, no, because we're saving that till the final. We're saving that part till the final. Yes.
All right.
This is the lick of the icing before you actually get into the razors that are embedded deep within the cake. Amazing.
And if anyone for some reason out there is a fan and they happen to notice from watching a lot of years of Summoning Insight that despite the fact I began the split agreeing Fnatic did have the best team on paper, somehow I've managed to end up against Fnatic towards the end of the split. Just one of those coincidences, you know. Funny how life works out, isn't it? You know, so all I'm going to say is, yes, I'll take the boring mage mid lane player who's playing Victor and Oriana.
He played Lucian in the last series.
To beat your hyphy fucking roaming mid laner. Yeah, you know what? What's that? Isn't it day ending in a Y? I think we'll stick to our old fucking predilections. Look up that word.
All right, we'll do.
I don't know what that means.
We'll do viewer questions now to end the show.
Yes, let's do it.
Inside on Esports Discord, Grogcoin channel.
I think Gilius asked a question earlier. How good he?
Not in the right channel. He didn't. It's all right, Gilius.
There you go.
You are always impressive in terms of your ability to carry teams late in the split. You've done great. I love watching you play. Anyway, let's go. Another F1 question. Question for context for Thorin.
Okay.
In the past, if you pass another driver by, this is like a tournament like rules question. In the past, if you pass another driver by leaving the racetrack or forcing another driver off of the racetrack, the stewards would tell you to give up the advantage you gained. So if you pass someone by going off the track, you have to give up that spot and let the driver pass you. Is basically
so you can't do stuff like just go straight over when there's a corner.
Yeah.
You can't just drive over the middle, obviously. Yes, of course.
Starting this year, it is up to teams to determine when to give the advantage back, and the stewards will only step in later to retrospectively investigate and possibly penalize. This change is in part of an effort to reduce radio traffic between stewards and teams, aka team whining to refs. Will this self-regulation among teams lead to positive or negative results? You should never let the teams decide this.
Seems obvious they'll just exploit it and never. It seems obvious it'll make it worse, right? If you don't know, from CSGO, we have this problem all the time, which is in CSGO, unfortunately, unlike Riot, because the game dev isn't involved, basically pro players, at least until a few years ago, could sort of bully admins and could kind of get their own way. And so famously in our game, anytime you let players decide, it just becomes a nightmare. Like, you just have infighting, you have people always like, oh, it was unfair. No, it was unfair to us. Like, that's why there's a reason you have refs. It's their job to interpret the rules and apply them. And by the way, I'm sorry, it is your job just to accept the ruling. You can say it's shit if you don't like it, but you have to accept the ruling, because that's essentially the whole point of having a ref in a sport. We're saying someone has to make a call in the moment. We can't just rewind time and replay the race. So in this particular case, you have to allow the ref to do it. It's a terrible idea to let teams have any fucking agency in this matter.
You could literally, if you're having problems with it, just literally hire a ref whose only job is to make that decision when the team should give up the spot. Just hire that guy. It's like the NFL. It's like, just hire the dude to sit in the fucking skybox and watch the replay and make the right call. We have the technology now. There's no excuse. Do you have F1
exactly.
thoughts?
If I wanted to waste, if I wanted to waste 3 hours,
Schumacher is gone. Like,
if I wanted to watch a whole year of a sport and then waste 3 hours and at the last second have a ref fuck me over, I'd just watch the fucking Saints play in the NFL. Anyone who's seen the last 10 years,
All right, what are some of the highlights and lowlights of Peanut's illustrious / infamous playoff career? Well, a lot of the
all the finals.
He did win a bunch of finals too. Like that's
a couple. Yeah, he won a couple.
Yeah, he's won a bunch of finals. It was mostly earlier in his career when he would like int. Although he did kind of int in the series versus Dom1, like that Nocturne game where he just gets killed randomly in the jungle because he's recalling on a ward was pretty terrible. I mean, I can tell you straight up that one of the reasons he was brought into Gen.G is because he's the oldest player on the team and is expected to be like an in-game leader and shot caller, which...
That's wild, by the way. That's really wild, thinking about it.
That he's the oldest player, or that he would be shot calling? Both.
Both.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, both.
It was funny because I was in Korea at the Gen.G facility, and like they were like, he's the oldest player on the team now. And he's like, he's 26. I was like, oh my God, I was casting this guy when he was 17. Holy shit, I am old. But... I don't know, like
still a choker though. Still a choker at heart.
I'm not sure. Sometimes it feels like his team wins in spite of him playing worse in high pressure situations.
Yeah. 2017. I think for me it's like 2017 SKT. Not even playoff regards, but just the way they performed at Worlds. I think that was like yeah, the most depressing thing I've ever seen. Quite frankly, like that was just not fun.
Here's the truth. It is illegal to lose to Bengi Nidalee first time.
Oh, yeah,
that's illegal.
I didn't think about that one either.
That's not acceptable.
Yeah, that was. Oh my god.
The problem is, though, I have to say, Peanut is the player who's, in my opinion, he is the ultimate League of Legends player that shows you what pressure does. Because if there was no pressure, this guy's fucking amazing at League of Legends. It's no wonder he's in all these teams, and he's actually had, like you're talking about now, incredible longevity. Think about how, dude, this guy's been the MVP. It was like last year. And think about how many teams he's been in now. He must have been in, what, 4 or 5 teams that have had a crack at Worlds, LCK. Just unfortunately, for some reason, when you put him in the biggest pressure moments, some of the amazing shit he does just doesn't work out. It just doesn't have the same philosophy for the game suddenly.
Maybe he just has to drink a bit before the game, you know, just to ease the nerves.
Dutch courage.
There you go. Take a shot of soju. Let's move on. The CSGO community seems to be much more conscious of the role of observer than in League. I feel that outside of the LCS, they generally do a fine job. Why is the LCS behind on this front?
I don't know, because this is one area I'd be interested to get Monty's take, because I've never worked on an actual live League of Legends broadcast of commentary, so I'm not sure what the protocols are here. But I agree. There's a lot of times I feel like in LCS, like they're watching, like, yes, some people are having a fight in the bot lane, but on the mini map, I can just see like someone's going to die in top lane, and they never seem to catch it. Like they always seem to have things that are just off in that way. So what I wonder is this is why I want to ask Monty, is I sometimes wonder if in LCS particularly, they're told sort of stick with whatever the caster's talking about, because I know, like in CSGO, for example, sometimes essentially we let the observer lead the cast, as in if he's the one looking for what the next big moment is, and he'll switch to that, and then the casters just sort of like seamlessly integrate whatever he was saying as the next focal point. So I wondered in League, because I always got the vibe, if you watch LCK, like the observer just goes to where the action is and the casters follow him, but I don't know what they do in the setup of LCS in that regard.
I think there are different observing philosophies in League of Legends. So when I worked for OGN, the observers were famous for like using their cursor to like circle items that were just bought and like trying to call attention to things, whereas when I worked with Riot, it was all about let's have the smooth camera movement and not have the cursor there, and like, you know, showing things that are happening, because they, you know, and there are pros to that, by the way, like the caster should recognize these things, and it can be distracting to a caster or like derail the story the caster is trying to tell, to have the observer like fucking with you like that. But also at times it can be helpful to direct the conversation. So I don't think it's like right or wrong. It was just a very different style of doing things. I think most of the observing has kind of evened out across the world, but I still think that when I watch,
Korea's the best still, mate. Whenever I watch
LPL too, like what LCK does super well is that the replays will actually not show the whole replay. Like they'll quickly cut between an important part, skip over the dumb middle section, and then go immediately to the next important part. So they're very good at like summarizing action within the LCK. I've noticed when I've been watching those games this year. And LCS, like it does feel like. So here's the thing about observing, guys. If it requires a lot of knowledge to be a good observer, to know where the action's going to happen. And the thing about good games is that they're, in many ways, they are more predictable because players are doing the right thing. In LCS, dumb shit can happen for no reason that is completely unpredictable that a good observer would not necessarily catch, okay? So it is kind of a question sometimes about whether the observers are bad or whether the players are bad.
I mean, they captured the Dignitas Renegade thing where
that was really
pretty
good
well,
observing, actually.
Even though with like no kills for the whole game or whatever. Yeah.
No. It was when they were like inting at tower and herald simultaneously.
Oh, right.
Yes, they did actually do a very good job, unfortunately, of catching all of that. Unfortunately for me. But yes, that's true.
Then?
That was truly awful, and they did a good job of observing it. Sometimes like random shit can happen that shouldn't necessarily happen, and you can have more observers or somebody who's like calling that out. Sometimes it can be on the game director who's like, you know, you have multiple observers, and knowing where to go, like which feed to go to, can be part of it as well. But you know, I'm not actually too bothered by that in League of Legends, because you can always just put a replay on. There's enough downtime that you never you know, it's rare that you actually feel like you missed something. So it's not. I don't really have an issue with league observing. I think in CS, the other thing is that, you know, frankly, I suspect that another reason why we don't necessarily, you guys don't know who the observers are, is because in CS, the tournament operators fight over good observers because it makes a massive difference in the game. And the observers are like Twitter personalities themselves. Like, look at people like Prius and Sapphire in CSGO. These are in-demand observers because they're really good at their craft. And the fans know when they're on a tournament, and they have a public personality, which drives their value up because they get better rates as organizers compete for their services. Riot doesn't want that to happen, guys. They don't want to pay the observer. That's why they won't promote the observers, you know. So.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Taking offense to what Riot is doing in terms of their
they don't ever want to platform you or anybody. Because it makes your negotiating power higher. I've rarely heard anyone in the esports industry address the issue of back pain due to the predominantly sedentary lifestyle. This is not a widespread problem for players, casters, and analysts alike. Casters, I prefer standing when I cast, number one. I think a lot of casters prefer standing and having standing setups. Whenever I cast Riot International events, it was standing setups. I actually didn't like sitting down at OGN. It was really irritating. Because even if you're standing up for a best of 5, it's still only like 5 hours and you can sit during the breaks and kind of catch up. But it feels a lot better to stand when casting for the most part. I don't know from the player side. Amazing.
I mean, it has kind of been, I guess, addressed by having more physical therapy and sports psychs. But yeah, there is a quite. I mean, at least for me, I noticed this when I stopped playing for a bit. That my posture became so much better, like over a very short period of time, to actually just renegotiate, I guess, my body to a certain extent, because I felt my shoulders weren't looking forward, my lower back was weak, and that's kind of the issues that a lot of players have, which is why there has been such an onus on the sports therapy happening within esports. But a lot of players still don't take it seriously enough, and most of them still have bad posture. They actually have bad backs. They actually talk about it. Same for bad wrists, because they use. I mean, they actually. It's mostly when you use other things other than your mouse, and you kind of get used to other motions. But it's also simply if they have too low DPM or too high DPM, that kind of doesn't really makes it almost like a wrist flick instead of a arm flick. You know, that's the main issue I see with a lot of people. So sedentary lifestyle and like just choices they make. And then diets are also terrible, so that doesn't help the inflammation too, you know. And then long hours, high stress, some probably psychosomatic at this point. It's not just actual like mechanical difficulties, but also probably some psychological factors too playing into it. So
to be fair though, how much of that is just like being older and how much is not being in TSM anymore? Like, I imagine you leave TSM, suddenly you can stand up straight again, put your shoulders out, you can look yourself in the mirror again, you don't feel like a sellout bitch, you know, like, oh, so you're walking around, the sun's out, you know, Mordor's way back in the back over there, fucking, you know, the fresh air. Beautiful, no bullshit in the air, open communication with animals and creatures and other entities in the world. You're not against everyone all the time.
Okay, you know.
He's got his jacket. He's
where's it? Where's
it? Oh my god! Wait, is that TSM's music? What the hell?
What is this?
He's got it. He's got it on his.
I assumed from the question, by the way, that was about like, when are we finally going to address in esports the issue of back pain? I assumed it was going to be like a really clever question, backdoor its way into some sort of a frogging analogy, you know, like, yeah, after about 9 years carrying some motherfucker on your back, it does get a bit tiresome playing that victor matchup, doesn't it?
Also,
yeah, I agree.
I love Reggie. Okay, I like him. It's harder to defend now because of the ongoing investigation.
It's okay,
but the man has done a lot for me. Like, right. I think I'm happy that I've met him. Let's put it this way.
It's impossible to be all evil.
Yeah, I mean, there's some balance. I mean, I mean, we talked about this before we got on the show, right? Like, we talked about this bit that, like, I kind of wish Reggie was, I guess, to the public more likable in a way, that he was actually engaging with it better. I think that's what it is. If he actually had more talk shows that he was on, he was actually talking to more diverse crowd instead of just having his I guess YouTube videos from 2013 circulating, there'd be a lot more differential opinions on him. We had this. I hated Thorin. I hated Monte simply because of my my view from TSM. That I was kind of like.
We did also talk a lot of shit. There was that as well. Like,
not saying we don't deserve it.
You guys deserved it. I deserved it. Like whatever it is, But point being, the man. I mean, I don't know what he did after me, and I don't claim to know. Like that's what it is. But the man really, I suppose he deserves another shot at like addressing the public. I think that's what it is, in a fair way. I think the public should also address him in a fair way.
Of course.
But that is all you can ask for at this point. But keep the memes up. I'm not offended by him. I'm okay.
Look, man. Like he's only hurting himself a lot of the time, right? Or he's trusting people who make him look bad, right?
I also, by the way, let's be real, he's not actually evil. Like,
no.
I actually thought Richard made a very good point about this. When the first things came out a few months ago about, like, oh, he's abusive, Richard even made a good point, which I agree with, which is, even though when you say abusive there, you mean metaphorically. Unfortunately, if you say abusive, people are going to start thinking, like, oh my God, was he, like, sexually abusive? No, that's exactly what you don't want to. Like, the point here is, basically, you might think he's an asshole. That's it. He's just a bit of an arsehole. He's not really like evil. Put it this way, there's a bazillion owners and people even in LCS that have done way worse fucking shit than that. Come on, man. Like, he's just an arsehole. That's the problem. And his problem is, like, here's another factor everyone's not factoring in, right? If they were in their prime right now, winning all the championships, these wouldn't be.
No one's saying anything.
Yeah, it's the fact that it's simultaneous with Bjergsen left and Lena left, and then the results are the worst. It's like, this is the perfect shitstorm for this guy, unfortunately.
No,
but he also doesn't do himself any favors. I agree. He could put himself out there more for sure.
I don't think he can right now. Like I think unfortunately,
well, before the investigation,
right.
In the past years, he could have built up a big bank of goodwill in years when he was more liked if he'd have been a bit more out there on the media circuit. I agree.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what he could have done. Like, I mean, I can say as much. Like when I was on the team, he really tried to make it a family. Maybe we weren't the best family, I suppose, but it was.
Yeah. It was a bit more like Craster in Game of Thrones, North of the Wall. But
Look, amazing. All I'm gonna say is cult leaders.
That's the reference.
That's a hell of a reference.
And he's taking out little baby Santorin.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just gonna get rid of him. There you go, bloody hell.
But cult leaders also try and make things like.
Come on, no.
Charles Manson had a family. I'm just saying, like, there's
okay.
Amazing.
He called it his family. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, there are other historical figures that also had families.
No. What I'm saying, amazing, is that it is a technique that is used intentionally to create a cult environment.
Yeah, I did not suffer from. I'm still not suffering from a Stockholm syndrome. I'm okay.
Okay, good. I'm glad you're okay. This segues to the next question. We already talked about this. What are the worst possible outcomes for Reginald/TSM investigation? So, if it's just him being mean to people, probably nothing happens. Like it's just being a jerk, right? That's not, it's his company. He can be a jerk if he wants to. He can ruin his company from the inside by making good people afraid to work with him and like take responsibility because then he blasts them for it. But that's just going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy of TSM slowly just sinking below the waves because they can't retain the talent or people that they need in order to be successful. Now, if there is something else that's revealed through this, and this would be, to be very clear, I don't know of any incidents of anything more severe than this.
Precedent. No, exactly, yeah.
I don't know of anything. So what my anticipation is that nothing happens. But if the investigation does reveal something more serious, and that could be literally anything, and I've never heard of Reggie sexually harassing people or physically hurting people. I've never heard of any of that. But if something like that is revealed, that I think would be more serious.
Yeah, I didn't have any punching. I mean, I didn't have many fights with him. Like didn't throw fists. So.
Yeah, I never heard of that. So I'm not anticipating that to be a result. But I think that's the only way that something actually serious happens. Have you guys seen The Batman? If so, what did you think of it? Nope.
I haven't seen it.
Well, rip. I'm bored of superhero movies, so probably.
Here's the thing.
Why is it it's like the 5th reboot of the fucking role? Like, I don't want to see it anymore.
The problem I have is this: like, based on some of the people who've said it was good, like there are some people I trust said it was like worth watching. It's good. My problem is this: I had to go through this like it's going to sound boomer, like 15 years ago when Batman Begins came out, you all did this. You all went, oh my God, it's incredible. And I went, oh wow, really? I usually like comics. I might watch it. What's so good? And they were like, you don't understand, Thorin. It's a really gritty modern day take on Batman where it's like in the real world. It's like, so you just never read the comics from the 80s then? That was literally in 1980s was when Frank Miller did The Dark Knight Returns, which is what all this shit is based off. So as far as I can tell, the vibe I've got from people's initial comments is it sounds like this is more like another Frank Miller one, Batman Year One, where basically he did an incredibly gritty, like alternate world take on what Batman's origin was like. And in this world, it's like it's a very, very dark universe where essentially he's like very violent and kills people. But the idea is they're such criminals, you know, he's been pushed to a position of nihilism. It sounds like it's in this vein. So I'll give it a go at some point in time. But like I say, unfortunately for me, I feel like other people, there's something more novel about it than it is to me. Like that's Batman's been like that for 40 plus years now, guys.
And also, like the way people sold it to me, it was like, oh yeah, it's a film noir take on Batman. And my response to that is, as somebody who really enjoys film noir, I have a million other film noir movies that I could watch that are good and almost certainly better because they don't contain superheroes, which is kind of antithetical to film noir in the first place. And even if I wanted a modern take on film noir, I have Nightmare Alley that was released directed by Guillermo del Toro this last year. I've got LA Confidential, which is like a modern noir. So I really feel like I would prefer to watch more original, non-derivative film noirs, or I could just go back to any of the number of excellent dozens of great film noir movies released over the last, 80 years? And be perfectly satisfied. I may watch it if my wife is like, let's watch it on a streaming service in the future, but I'm pretty much done with superhero movies unless my wife is like, I want to watch it, and then I will begrudgingly agree. Is there a way to make a deal with the devil, Tencent, so we can fuck over Riot and get more international competition with good formats? As far as I can tell, Tencent only cares about what's going on in China, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But how much impact do they have on the international competition? How much impact does Riot, the international headquarters, have on it? Like, do you know?
Well, look, all I can say is Tencent could take that over at any point in time that they want to take it over. So the real question is they don't do it. Now, will they do it in the future is the only question. It's never going to happen unless Tencent decides to organize the Super League concept where you have consistent international competition, which that could happen if viewership in the game and interest in the esport would require a consolidation down the years to maintain an acceptable level. But as long as things are going well in the regions, especially in China, locally, I don't see them making that change.
Here's the bad news if you're a fan from the West. You've made the classic mistake that annoys European fans when NA people do it all the time. You think we're all obsessed with LCS being really good. We're not. Those of us who are out for America don't give a fuck.
I'm from America, I don't care.
I only do in the context of if I apply my mind to it and think, how could it get better? Like as a hypothetical, I don't really care if TSM's ever good. Like Europe's good, China's amazing, Korea's amazing. Right now, think if you were like Tencent from LPL or LCK, what you would do is this: you would look at your scenes and go, LPL's incredible. What an amazing scene China has. Wow, LCK is great. What an amazing scene Korea has. And then every now and then we have a couple of international competitions where we let some worse teams into play. Why would I be going out my way to try and make more of those? Yeah, exactly. I've already got mine nailed. If I'm in China or Korea, we've got the perfect system. The problem for you in the West is your domestic leagues aren't that good, usually, and then your whole hopes are pinned on the international tournament. It ain't the same for the others. Like, it's true, they want to win them, but like, I think they think their structure domestically is perfectly fine and they don't need more.
Major League Baseball is not overly concerned when they play an international tournament like the Olympics that, like, oh man, we really need to prop up Team Korea here and their KBO team that's going to play Team USA in the Olympics or whatever, right? Like, NHL isn't worried about what, a minor, like the French hockey team is going to do compared to Canada and the USA at the Olympics. It's not a concern. Like, you have a healthy league in LPL. It's been the best league in the world for the last number of years. LCK is a close second. You have these big scenes that have significantly more viewership. And what LCS is it's like the Korean baseball league, KBO, compared to MLB. MLB doesn't give a shit about KBO.
Is it? I mean,
yes. In terms of viewership,
used in an extreme example.
But I'm thinking more about, like, I can't imagine that Chinese League of Legends fans and Korean League of Legends fans do not enjoy like Europeans being beaten. You know, like it's like
just like the
'cause
same way that at the Olympics you enjoy a powerhouse team just that's from your region beating down on other teams.
I mean, I don't think it's the same. I mean, I know what you mean, but like there is more ego involved, I think, with fans of League of Legends than there is with the Olympics. Like, of course, when I watch the Olympics, I'm not like, well, Germany. I mean, or I guess because I actually follow more US sports. Oh, the US is playing, I don't know, Nigeria in basketball or whatever it is. It's not like I'm enjoying this 100-20 slaughter within the first half, but I think it's a bit more like the US playing, I guess, Germany or I guess Argentina or something like that, in terms of the relative scale. There is enjoyment in there, but they do have functional systems to the point that international competition is partially obsolete for them. Yeah, that I agree with. I think it is obsolete.
It's more of a novelty, it's just fun for the fact that, as you say, you don't get to play against those people. Like your analogy is the best one, because even though if people don't know, just like Worlds, actually, it's not a bad analogy. Like Spain or Argentina can, and in fact have beaten the USA previously. It's not like it's impossible for the big region too. But here's the difference: which would you rather watch? An Olympic match, which they just play best of one. But let's say imagine they had a series, or the NBA Finals. It's hands down the NBA Finals, isn't it? Like you're a basketball fan, It's just reality, isn't it?
Our regional leagues, I mean, not our regional leagues, but like I as you said, like I think our like and the LEC as well as the LCS, like the novelty has actually worn off in terms of like we don't find it as exciting as I believe the Koreans find the LCK or Chinese fans find the LPL. Like I think there is a vast difference in terms of like fan activity. We've gotten tired of our shit basically. We just want to see more. I think that's the fans' perspective at this point. And so, but yeah, like I don't think, as you said, Tencent, if they don't care, they don't care. That's what it is.
Yep. I've recently rediscovered the gem that is Breaking Point. What other team in LoL history would you like to have had such an in-depth documentary about? I'll go with TSM's 2014 season with Amazing. I would actually have loved to have seen the inside of that team.
I mean, you would have liked it. I think you would have. I think psychologists would have liked it too. Not because of the relationship we had. Like I guess with our coaches, but rather in the team was really interesting at certain times before Last Boy came in, especially.
Yep.
I think that was
I give me the Glebe shit, man. Give me the Glebe shit. Give me the Loco coaching. Also, just in general, like if we had footage of all of Loco's like teams that he coached, that would be incredible. I would watch the Loco documentary 1000%. That would...
For me, there's an easy answer to this. What's funny is it's going to be a team from season 9. So I've already tricked all of you because you're all going to go G2, right? No, because what was brilliant about G2, you saw on the server, all you would see on their documentary is a bunch of like wacky, fun things and people doing jokes to shit. The team that you want to see a documentary from, I'm telling you right now, and I will make it, maybe not as a documentary, I might have to do it as a written article or something like that. One day, when Youngbok retires, I'm telling you right now, we're going to make a fucking documentary about season 9 Fnatic, the one where they'd lost caps to G2 and they brought in Nemesis. And if you remember, they started like, what was it, like 2-7 or something mental in LEC.
Oh, yeah.
And they turned it around and they made it, that wasn't the split they made the finals. It was the summer they made it to the finals. They were like, it became a good team by Worlds. Right, basically, the things I know from inside that team of what Youngbok had to do to like band-aid shit, to like make players that had no ability to play with each other functional, to make champion pools so that people could actually pick from like 3 options that made them able to play in a comp. Like if you could just see what they did behind the scenes to turn this team around, it'd be mega. It would be like Breaking Point with like a vaguely happy ending. Obviously they don't win the championship, but they made it like top 8 at Worlds. They were in the finals. It would be so fucking good, I'm telling you. And it has all the cast in it. It has little shitter fucking stubborn bastard Nemesis. It has fucking Reckless in all his Princess and the Pea glory. Sat up there, I feel a slight disturbance in the force today. Get him out the room. Get him out the room. Like it has fucking Hillesang just inting his way to victory permanently. It has Broxer just looking around going, golly, getting a bit nervous in here. It has Whippo. Oh, it's shit, mate. It'd be one of the best documentaries ever. I'm telling you right now.
I think some other good ones would be the Cloud9 season when Sneaky and Jensen got benched.
Oh yeah,
that would probably be incredible. Another incredible one would be the Rocks Tigers in 2015 when they were like too poor to afford air conditioning because the entire like LCK fell apart and all the players went to China, and they were on this team that had no fucking money whatsoever. So that would probably be a super interesting one, especially with how well they were doing that year. Yeah, some good ones.
Yeah, or any of the really old ones, the really, really old ones, like something like. I would have liked to be in this final one in the CLGU team. I think that would have been fun. Like the 2012 one with Crepo, Yellow Pete, Wicked, Froggen.
Yeah.
Like those arguments, and especially Snoopy. Like I can only imagine. I can only imagine because you hear Froggen talk, you hear Crepo talk. Like that must have been just an insane room to be in. You know, every single day, everyone throwing out the ideas, being completely insane, whatever it is, and then. Yeah, it working out somehow. So,
if I get true unrestricted access, Monty, I'll tell you right now, the team I'm making a documentary. I'm going back in time, and we're going back to 2013, 2014, amazing, and we're just following around the Swaz and Expected Fnatic. Because I'll tell you what, the behind-the-scenes footage. It's going to be fucking off the chain. First of all, y'all don't even know the famous people that they were getting mixed up with. And they were party. Oh, I'm going to use all the euphemisms because these were wild boys. I always say back then, right? I don't know if they were the best because, like, if people know, they sort of like mailed in the regular splits, but they would always get their shit together in the playoffs. So I would just describe them the way people always describe Shaquille O'Neal. Because if people don't know, Shaq actually had like a fairly bad work ethic and could have been a way greater player. Like he's already maybe a top 10 player ever, but he could have been like contender for best player ever if he had like a killer work ethic. Their team is the same way, but here's the way you describe it though. Just like Shaq, I bet there's nobody had more fun relative to how much success they also had than Expected. So I was like, these boys were not only winning, they were fucking living. They were not only, listen, they were winning the domestic title. They were always competing internationally, and they were doing it their own way. This wasn't back when you had the coaches doing everything. They just ran their team, and it was fucking glorious in sort of a rock and roll way. They were like the Rolling Stones, essentially. Where it is essentially like, how is Expected, in this case, Keith Richards, how is he still alive? Shouldn't the drugs have killed him by now, for God's sake? You know what I mean? It's all that vibe.
All right.
What do you think? You were there, amazing. You could corroborate. This would be a fucking sick documentary, right?
Maybe.
those stories are for 10 years from now. Then all those stories will come
Exactly.
out.
Yes. All these stories are years down the line, of course.
Yeah, they haven't passed into the public domain yet, but they will. They will. I'm low-key hyped is the last question about T1 this year, but I'm tempering those expectations that I've heard your discussion on the relative weak state of the LCK teams right now. What do you think the biggest trap other analyst casters personalities are falling into when they start hyping up T1 for MSI and Worlds this year?
Is it only in regards to LPL at this point that they could fall flat?
You would think that would be the case. Yeah. We've talked about, potential meta shifts. Like they play this style that is really good and they execute on very well. Now we assume they can adapt to the meta. I think that's a reasonable assumption considering all these players were also on the team in a very different meta last year, but you never know. I think their macro sense is really good. I think that some of the positioning of players like Gumayushi can be punished against very good teams. And Korea may not be able to bail him out against super good teams.
That's reasonable. But the only other angle I could see is maybe, I guess, how quick some of the LPL teams play. Maybe that's what it is. That could be their downfall. That they may not get into the rhythms that they want to get into in order to win, because they usually do actually win the early games. It's not like they're somehow magically always in control and farm up and then they win. It's simply that they actually make the first play more often than not. And I think that's something LPL teams are really, really good at in comparison to most other teams in the world. That proactiveness that's going to potentially be something that's going to break T1's spirit before they can actually develop it in a game. But I don't know, like that's the only thing I can see.
While I understand we can only talk about this now, as someone who has seen lots of years of esports, it doesn't matter, League of Legends, any esport, the team that's the best in fucking March is very rarely the best in October when you have Worlds. So all I'll say is, like, just history suggests, there'll be plenty of people to challenge them. Maybe even from in Korea, who the fuck knows? A split can do a lot to a team.
Also, you have to acknowledge that the top lane pool hasn't been the best, as we discussed earlier, particularly against other top teams, like you would argue that while Xayah has been good, there's either been a team gap between T1 and the enemy team when there's been a good top laner like Keen or Rascal, or there's been a top gap when the rest of the enemy team is good, because we wouldn't say that, you know, Thorin or Birdall are like world-beating top laners, and the top lane pool is much more competitive in LPL overall. So even though Xayah has been good, he has been a big fish in a small pond, and that may be exploitable against top LPL team.
Do we know, or do you know how much SK is scrimming LPL teams at this point in time? Is there still a lot of interaction, or is there not?
I could probably find out, but I don't know right now.
Okay.
They probably do scrim. I mean, there is a pretty healthy amount, at least in the past, has been a pretty healthy amount of crossover between teams scrimming each other. And my guess is that especially as playoffs go on, they will scrim each other more because they don't have to play against each other in the finals, right? So by the time we get to the finals, which we are in LCK right now, I would imagine this week is probably both Gen.G and T1 scrimming exclusively against Taiwanese or Chinese teams. Or their B teams. So, yeah. All right. That was the last question, guys. We're going to end the show.
Oh my God.
Right now. Goodbye.